Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome one and all to the Defiant Takes Football Show. I'm Max Dean. You can find me on Twitter at @TheMaxDean. I'm here with Kyron Samuels, our offensive line expert and insider. You can find him at Kyron Samuels. And we are here with Max Chadwick at Chad_Maxwick on Twitter. Max works over at PFF. He's been killing it lately. It's been a while since we've had him on the show. We're excited to have him back, man. And we are going to run through a guest mock draft featuring Max Chadwick. Max, how you doing, man?
I'm doing awesome, guys. I miss being on here. Honestly, I love talking to you guys. I mentioned before we got on the air that I've been watching so many of your prospect breakdowns, Kyron's O-line breakdowns, your mock drafts, everything. You guys are killing it right now. So I'm very excited to see where you guys and of course Nick go from here because it looks like a pretty good rocket ship trajectory you guys got right now. So I'm excited.
Here's hoping, man. Appreciate that very much. Thank you. Kyron, how you doing today?
Doing pretty good, man. A little tired this morning. Had a long night staying up watching Succession and all that stuff, but I'm ready to get into it.
I got to start that. Should I start that from the beginning? Because I started it and I stopped and then I stopped it. So should I restart?
You got to start back. Yeah,
okay. Start back. All right, I'm gonna start tonight then.
Oh, to have the time to invest into a long-term show like that, I'm jealous. I'm genuinely jealous. Also, want to shout out Noah Ashley, our producer at No Ashley Sports. Noah, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Yeah, I'm ready to get into another week of it. Happy to be editing some more articles from some more writers that we got on board. It's a good time over here.
Cool. Yeah, and this week we're going to be doing our projected starters pre-draft. So we're doing projected starters, all 22 for every team. Those will be dropping on DefiantTakesFootball.com. Of course, you can find Defiant Takes Football at Defiant Takes on all social media outlets. So I'm excited to get into it. We have a 2-hour show. So we'll see how long it takes us to get through the mock draft. If we have a little extra time at the end, we'll talk about some of the prospects that didn't make it into the mock and kind of get your background because, you cover college football for PFF. You do a great job. You've always got the insights into these guys, their backstories, what their experiences were like. So I absolutely encourage anybody watching to go check out Max over at PFF because he's killing the college scene. So do you want to preface this with anything? Do you want to tell us kind of what your mindset was going into it?
This is fully a what I would do mock draft because we're going to start off with that number one pick, and it is very much not what I think will happen, but a completely what I would do. So yeah, this is completely what I would do, and I threw this together very quickly. So maybe there are some picks that you guys are going to hate. So it's maybe not a perfect mock draft. None are really, but I'm excited to get into this one now.
Beautiful. All right, so I doubt there's any picks that we hate, but definitely some discussions to be had. All right, so let's jump into it, man. I'm going to let you present everything as you want to with the first overall pick, the Carolina Panthers select.
Yeah, so this is one that I know for a fact Kyron will like this one. I'm taking Bryce Young, and this is exactly what I said before. This isn't what I think is going to happen. I mean, if you guys watch that video of Josh McCown at Ohio State's Pro Day, a reporter actually caught it on camera. McCown saying, hey, we got to play horse sometime. Stroud was like, oh, we got a court right back here. Let's go play. And then McCown literally said to him, man, when you live in Charlotte, we'll go play horse. And I was like, all right, well, they're taking C.J. Stroud, the number one overall pick. So that's the kind of quarterback I think Frank Reich wants in their system. He's the heavy favorite. So C.J. Stroud, I think, will be the number one pick. But I still think Bryce Young is clearly the top quarterback in this class. And, of course, the size will be a big detractor for him. But everything else, man, I mean, just his mind, his IQ and everything is some of the best I've ever seen from a quarterback prospect. I think he's the highest floor by far. I still think there's a chance C.J. Stroud isn't as good as people think just because he was protected so much in that Ohio State offense. Young really wasn't. It sounds weird saying, oh, Alabama didn't really help him out that much, but the O-line was still really good, but the weapons really weren't that good, and yet Bryce Young was still one of the best quarterbacks in the country. So I think he's going to go into any situation, probably the Texans, and still succeed, whereas C.J. Stroud, I think you still need to build a really good supporting cast around him. So that's why I think Bryce Young's a higher floor guy. I would take him with the number one overall pick, but I don't think that's what's going to actually happen on April 27th.
Yeah, I think the size is going to play into it. I think you can definitely talk yourself into the arm talent, the accuracy of CJ Stroud. First overall, I get that. But if you look at Bryce Young, his skill set is just so well-rounded for a quarterback coming out of college. I mean, he has accuracy too. He has the ability to throw from anywhere on the field. He's able to dissect defenses, and he just has a poise as a quarterback that you just rarely see coming out of college. And it is what it is. I mean, it's one of those things where the size is going to matter to some people. Kyron, how do you feel about Bryce going first overall?
I mean, like I said, I agree with Max a lot. He is the best quarterback in this draft. He has the highest floor. He's done it the most. I think he has a level above when it comes to processing ability as well. I think he's more advanced. And I don't think that that's like a slight to CJ or any of the other prospects. He's just that much more ahead. He's played for a professional offensive coordinator in Bill O'Brien for 2 years. He's been in the system. He got to sit behind Mac Jones for a year and kind of learn a little bit. He's just a little bit more advanced. Now, the physical concerns are valid to some degree, but like I said, we did it a couple of weeks ago. There's been enough smaller stature quarterbacks that have not only been in the league, but been healthy and played well, so where this shouldn't be as big of a concern. Like, look at Baker Mayfield, for example. I mean, he hasn't had a ton of injury history. And he's been a decent quarterback when he's been on the field. So, I mean, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray. I mean, you can keep going on down. Even Tua. I know he's had some concussion stuff, but other than that, he's been relatively healthy. So I don't think the size is as big of a concern, or shouldn't be as big of a concern as it is. But I do agree that Bryce is the best quarterback in the draft with the highest floor. And we'll kind of talk about it with the next bit. But I think that Carolina has done a pretty good job this year of building a supporting cast around whoever they decide to select. But I do think that the Texans are in a much better spot if we're talking about supporting cast for a young quarterback. So it'll be interesting to see how people view them going forward as far as the support cast. I do agree with you because CJ Stroud has had, I mean, listen, he's played with 6 or 7 first-round receivers the last 2 years at Ohio State, and that's not hyperbole. I mean, you look at Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. I'm missing somebody from last year.
And Jigba and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Harrison Jr. Emeka Ibuka. He's going to be a first-round guy, in my opinion.
Julian Fleming could explode. Yeah.
And then who's the young guy? Brandon Ennis coming in. He's probably the next first-round kid coming out there. So when I'm talking about like the level of talent they play with at receiver, I think offensive line has been pretty similar. I don't think it's been that big of a discrepancy. But at receiver and even tight end, the talent has been exponentially better at Ohio State. So that is a very valid point that you brought up.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to bring up real quick, like, where do you think Ohio State's receiving core last year would rank in the NFL, like, right now? I thought it might be like a top 3 or 5 receiving core in the NFL. Right?
No, like, and listen, that sounds like blasphemous to say, right? But it's not false at all. Like, it's not wrong. Like, literally, I think about like Miami. You got Waddle and Hill. I mean, you can think about what they had last year with Olave, Wilson, and Jigba, Ibuka, and Marvin Harrison Jr. coming off the bench. You had 3 first-round guys coming off the bench. I mean, that's pretty insane when you think about it. And then you think about a Julian Fleming, a guy with his natural talent, his natural ability. Jalen Ballard with his speed coming off. I mean, they literally had 8, 9 deep receivers. So it's pretty crazy when you think about it.
I think they might have 5 top 15 picks at receiver on that team, which is absolutely ridiculous when you think about it.
It's crazy. And it's not hyperbose because it's happened. And then Jackson Smith and Jacobs is going to get drafted very high this year. And we know what Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be next year. So it's crazy.
Yeah. Insane. Just concentration of talent. It's unreal. And I totally agree. Jackson Smith and Jigba is my favorite receiver in this class. And I don't know if he'll be the first one selected because you never know. But I think it would be a mistake to go anywhere aside from him if he's, if a wide receiver is what you need. But moving on to CJ Stroud here at pick number 2. So the Houston Texans still get a consolation prize in this case. In reality, there's a good chance that they actually do end up getting Bryce Young. But if CJ Stroud does make it to Houston at number 2, what do you think that fit looks like?
So I think it works. I think Kyron made a good point. Like, I think the Texans are actually building a good supporting cast. But otherwise, this is like, I think there is a clear QB1. I think there's a clear QB2 in this class, and that's Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. However, I mean, just in terms of how he'd fit in Houston, I don't know. This could be like a nightmare scenario for the Texans because if you remember, CJ Stroud's agent is David Mulugeta. His quarterback coach is Quincy Avery, both, some of the top at their respective jobs. They also represent Deshaun Watson, and they also coach Deshaun Watson. And I know there are a lot of people saying that, Stroud, who also works out with Deshaun all the time, said at the combine he looks up to Deshaun Watson and Michael Vick, which wasn't really a great quote from him in that press conference. But Yeah, CJ Stroud, I just don't think that they want him to go to Houston because of how horribly that situation went, other than obviously all the off-field stuff. But so I think that the Texans, this is who they should pick. But I could see this being a real issue just because I think the agent and I think the QB coach and even maybe Stroud really don't want to go to Houston, especially when his camp is all telling about all the horror stories that went on in Houston with Deshaun Watson. So I think Stroud is the guy here if he is number 2. I think it'll work out for the Texans and that Stroud will go number 1. So they don't have to deal with that headache. But I think that, in this mock draft, like this could be a problem for Houston, even though I think Stroud is clearly the guy they have to pick here.
What do you think, Kyron?
No, listen, I agree. I think that it's going to shake out how we both think it's going to shake out. CJ goes number 1, Bryce goes number 2. But just getting into the infrastructure of the team, I think that DeMeco Ryans and the additions that they've made on defense, I think it's going to be go a long way in helping out the young quarterbacks. I think the defense is going to be much improved this year. And then we look at the help they've gotten on the offensive line. I mean, they went out, they have Titus Howard, they locked up Larry Tunsil, who in my opinion is the best left tackle in football now. And they gave him one of the highest paid contracts for a left tackle ever. Then you have went out, got a veteran like Shaq Mason, who's one of the 6 to 8 best guards in football, right guards in football. Very good in the run game, so going to definitely help out the run game. You have Scotty Quisenberry at center, and you have Kenny Green, who you spent a 15th overall pick on last year, who I think is going to make a jump this year. So I think that unit is going to be anywhere from, at their peak, a top 6 to 7 offensive line. At the floor, probably closer to around 10. I think they have a top 10 offensive line. They have bookend tackles, which is the most important part in the passing game because let's just say CJ is the guy. CJ has a very good pocket presence. He's going to be able to read and get the ball out on time. Bryce is the same as well. I think that's the biggest thing. The Carolina Panthers have a good offensive line. I don't think that they have a offensive line that can peak out as good as the Texans could be this coming up year, especially with the additions that they've made. So, and I wouldn't be shocked to see them go offensive line with their second round pick. Maybe if a John Michael Schmitz is still on the board, you get a John Michael Schmitz to plug in at center. It goes from being a top 10 offensive line to, if at their peak, we could be saying they're one of the 5 or 6 best here. So I think that team is a little bit more suited for protection-wise because I don't think the receiver is going to be as much of an issue. You have veterans like wide receiver Robert Woods. You still have Nico Collins. You still have John Mitchell coming back from his thing. I heard he's doing very well. So if you can just get those guys back, I think the wide receiver talent isn't going to be that much of a problem. I think it'll be fine there. So whoever the quarterback is going to be in a good situation in Texas.
For sure. I mean, I think maybe they're not the most dangerous weapons of all time, but they're certainly good enough to help the development of a young quarterback and the offensive line. They've made the effort and investment there. And I think, again, a little bit, and we could be talking about this is one of the better units in the entire NFL. You like to see it come together. And then I don't know if it necessarily matters which quarterback is available there. I think that being at 2, you have to be pretty happy that one of those guys is going to be available to you. I don't know if it's going to be as big of a deal in terms of the relationship between Houston and Stroud, because I mean, these guys are all professionals, right? Like if you carry some of that over from one client to the next client, it's not necessarily how you want to do business. I think, there has been some movement in terms of leadership in Houston as well. DeMeco Ryans is a well-respected guy. So I think, his willingness to go there probably does help sway people a little bit if there was some apprehension. And ultimately, Stroud would probably be happy to be selected second overall if he isn't the first overall pick. So I think, there may be room for tension down the line if that were to happen. But I would expect that, it's going to be all roses day one if that does happen. All right. And then Pick and Spreads, aka Donnie Clemens, he says, yeah, I agree that DeMeco being there is going to help a lot. Totally agree with you. All right. So for the third overall pick here, you have the Cardinals staying in place. Do you just want to do no trades?
I did no trades. Yeah, I think this is a good trade down scenario. However, maybe the Titans are interested. I know I was actually at Kentucky's Pro Day and Vrabel was there and getting a very close look at Will Levis. But like someone like the Raiders, who we'll get into, this is before I went to the Pro Day, but there were no Raiders at Kentucky's Pro Day, at least from what I saw. So that was very eye-opening to me. So Yeah, I think it's a prime trade down if you can for the Cardinals. I think they need so many assets. It's probably going to be one of the worst teams in the league next year. In this scenario, I just decided to say, let's just stick it with what it is right now. So at number 3, I think this is a pretty slam dunk pick if they do decide to stay at there. That's Will Anderson Jr. I don't know if he is the top non-quarterback on the board. In fact, I would say he probably isn't. But after everything that's going on with Jalen Carter, who we'll get into in just a little bit, but I think that gives Will Anderson Jr. the slight edge. I'm not, completely dropping Jalen Carter like a lot of other people are right now. I think it's kind of insane to do that. But I think that now, whereas before it was a toss-up between them, now I think you got to give the slight edge to Will Anderson Jr. And the Cardinals for sure need help along the edge defender position. So he's a blue chip talent. You take him here at number 3 overall. He would have been the number 1 pick in last year's draft. I think it's a pretty easy pick here if you're staying here for the Cardinals.
No, I agree with you 100% there. I think Will is probably the best non-quarterback in this draft. Like you said, between him and Jalen Carter, it's so close. I mean, you're splitting hairs here. It probably comes down to fit and need more than actual ability because they're very similar in that aspect. If we're talking about high-end peak ability, I think they both can be perennial Pro Bowl, All-Pro type guys, and that's why you take them in the top 5, obviously. So I 100% agree. They need some edge help for sure in Arizona, and I think that's a good spot for Will Anderson. Probably a little bit lower expectations coming in. Because you see, depending on where you end up going, I mean, I think some of these teams in the high end draft picks can turn it around pretty quickly, and you'll expect a lot of these guys very early. So I think it's good for him to go to a spot where he can learn a little bit, because pass rushing is not just easy. You don't see many guys go into the NFL and have 12, 15 sack years. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So for him to be able to get into the league and kind of adjust a little bit and go to somewhere with a little bit lower expectations and really settle into his own, I think would be a good fit for him and the organization. So I love the Will Anderson Jr. pick here.
Yeah, I don't think you can go wrong with this pick. And I think, at 3 overall, you'd like to get a blue chip prospect and the guy that you know that you can count on as a leader, as a consistent contributor for the long haul. And that's who Will Anderson is, right? You know what I mean? He's Alabama built. He's pro ready in many different facets. He's, he knows how to work. He knows what the expectations are. And he's also produced at the highest level of college football. Many people thought that he should have been the Heisman winner last year. Like you said, good chance he would have been the first overall pick in the draft. And he didn't do anything this past year to, impact that stock at all. We just happen to have a few quarterbacks that are now worthy of that top pick. So I like that a lot. I think, we did our mock last week, and we basically came to the same conclusion. We did have them trading down and then selecting Will Anderson, but the fit makes all the sense in the world. All right. And then another pair up that we did have last week as well. You have the Colts at number 4, getting Anthony Richardson, the quarterback out of Florida. So do you think that they would likely trade up? Do you think that they'll hold it for hoping to get their guy? And how much of a difference do you think that they see between Anthony Richardson and Will Levis?
I think they do see a difference, and I could see the Colts potentially, trading. I don't know what it would take, but trading an extra pick just to move up one spot, just to secure Anthony Richardson, because obviously there are teams that could love him, like potentially the Raiders, potentially the Falcons, potentially the Titans. So I think that, yeah, I could see, or even the Seahawks, honestly, too, or even the Lions, which I would love for Anthony Richardson to go to Lions, but I think at 4 in this no trade mock draft, I think this is who they would go with. Shane Steichen obviously is the new head coach there. He was the Eagles offensive coordinator. And if you remember that Eagles offense, like Jalen Hurts excelled in that Eagles offense. And Anthony Richardson is like a souped up version of Jalen Hurts to an extent, And I'm not saying he's a better passer than Hurts. I think Hurts has been incredible in how he's developed over his career. But in terms of what he could be, Anthony Richardson is like Jalen Hurts on steroids, basically. So I think Shane Steichen will see a guy like that and say, okay, wow, I was so successful in this offense with Jalen Hurts. If I could turn this guy into what he could be, then this could be a very special quarterback for us. So I think this is who they would lean with over Will Levis, just because of the fit there in Indianapolis and what Shane Steichen kind of looks for in a quarterback. But I do think it's a little close between them, but I would also lean Anthony Richardson over Will Levis in the draft as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if anything, you're going to be able to see like how the offense translates with Anthony Richardson. They've had so much success with a dual threat quarterback. You might not be able to run it identically, but you can bring a lot of the same concepts over. You have the foundation of a really good offensive line. I think if you have a run-heavy offense, especially from the quarterback position, that also helps them out a lot too. Probably accentuates what they're good at. So the fit is pretty good there, I think. Kyron, what about you?
Yeah, I think the fit's really good here. And I agree with what you said about most of his just raw athletic ability. Like, I know some people probably hear that. You say he's like a souped up version of Jalen Hurts, but it's the truth. I mean, you talk about their stature, their size, their build, their makeup. Now, the mental part of the game, that's where I think Jalen Hurts was significantly ahead of a lot of people, but especially a guy like Anthony Richardson. But he played a lot more football. He was a coach's kid in high school, grew up. He went to Alabama, started as a true freshman, built trust with Nick Saban, and like that tells you what kind of person he is, right? We still don't know a lot of that stuff about Anthony Richardson, but from a pure physical standpoint, he is a souped-up version of Jalen Hurts. So that's a guy that you would love to have in that offense and that system, if it holds to be true that is tailor-made for a guy like that. So I think we'll see a lot of what Max said as well. If the system actually does translate, if it's the system or it's just a guy making a quantum leap, if we're talking about physical ability and going out to get an A.J. Brown and kind of taking the next step in that offense. So we'll get to see both of those there. But it's kind of interesting. We talk about Anthony Richardson going here and then either C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young going to Texans. We could have one of the better quarterback divisions in football, right? Trevor Lawrence, right? Depending on who the Titans go and get, we don't know who they're going to get. I wouldn't be shocked to see them trade up for somebody like we talked about that, or end up making a move for somebody. But you got Trevor Lawrence, C.J. Stroud, or Bryce Young, and Anthony Richardson all in the same division for the next 5 to 7 years, depending on it. Could be longer than that. So that could end up being one of the more electrifying divisions in football. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope that happens.
I didn't even think about that, but I mean, even the Titans, if the Colts do take Anthony Richardson, Titans could maybe say, all right, we got to get our guy and go get Will Levis. So all of a sudden, you got Levis, Lawrence, Bryce Young probably, and Anthony Richardson in the same division. Like, that is a pretty, like I said, electric division. And all of a sudden, the AFC South that's kind of been joked about for a while is all of a sudden a pretty exciting division. That's a great point. I didn't think about that.
It's funny how it goes cyclically like that. Like, there's always a division that's taking like a couple quarterbacks in the first round, and then we hype it up, and then like only one or none of them work out, and they're like, well, all right. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's cool to see these guys grow together in the same division, because if both do work out, it makes for some great rivalry there. So, all right, pick 5. So we're in lockstep fairly with what we said would probably happen, or at least our predictive mock and what you would do mock, because we also had the Seahawks taking Jalen Carter here at 5. Why do you think that's the ideal fit for the Seahawks?
So this is an interesting one, and I think this is one where you kind of really have to look at culture. And of course, that C.J. Stroud conspiracy I kind of put my tinfoil hat on a little bit for that. This one is kind of like, okay, you got to look at where he's going. And I think that Seattle's got a good culture there. They've proven at taking guys that maybe had some off-field issues and turn them into non-problems at all. So I think Jalen Carter, and the thing about Jalen Carter, and I know the pro day wasn't great, but like I saw a tweet from Arif Hassan, who's a phenomenal, covers the NFL phenomenally, and he was saying, like, listen, man, like, if I have a legal case against me and I know I'm going to court soon, like, I probably wouldn't be in the best shape of my life either. So like the fact that he didn't have a good pro day, I think is way overblown. And I think people are putting a little too much stock in that. The Carter stuff, I think you guys mentioned it before in a previous podcast, but I agree with you. Like, I think it's more, I don't think he's a bad guy. I think what he did was so stupid. And I think that's just what happened. And I think he did a very stupid thing. I don't think he's a bad person. So saying character issues, I guess you could apply it to him, but like, I think what he did was just dumb, and I think Jalen Carter is still, I think there's no other, concerns besides that. So I think that he's a guy that I don't think he could drop too far. I still think on field he is the best non-quarterback in the draft, in my opinion, and I would take him at number 3 if I was the Cardinals. If there were no off-field issues, but because there is, he slips to 5 here. But I don't think he should be falling much further than this, and I think that, of course, the culture matters and where he goes. I think Detroit also would be phenomenal for him with Dan Campbell there and all the great coaches they have there, too. I think they have a phenomenal culture in Detroit. But I think Seattle also is a very good fit. They need help on the defensive line. And I think Seattle, you just can't really pass on this guy, even though there are some concerns, of course. But I just think that, I trust what Seattle could do with him. And I think that he'd be a great pick for Seattle. So I'm not dropping him completely into like the number 9 or even lower than that, like a lot of people. But I did drop him a little bit because of what's been going on lately.
Yeah, so Donnie says that they threw a lot of money at defensive tackle this offseason. We talked about this last week too. It's not as much as you think. I mean,
yeah,
they brought back Jaron Reed, right? But it's only like $4.5 million, which isn't even high-end money for just like a run-stuffing nose tackle. That's like really rotational. I'm not sure how much is guaranteed, but there's no lock. And they also run a lot of odd fronts. They cycle guys through in rotation a lot. And I think, all of that aside, even if you had invested, I mean, maybe not if you're Washington and you've got like, 2 guys making almost $20 million, but that probably should not deter you from taking a prospect like Jalen Carter, unless the off-field stuff was incredibly concerning.
Mm-hmm.
You can't pass him up here because he's just too talented. I mean, he has all the tools and the production in the SEC. It's not a stretch to project him to be one of the top 3-4 pass rushing defensive linemen in the NFL. You know what I mean? Even from the interior, you could see that coming to fruition. The athletic traits they're too special. They're too good. And his hand usage is already really, really good as well. We're talking about this guy is, one of the best defensive tackle prospects to come out in quite a while. So I hear you, but I just think that, let's not overthink. I wouldn't want to overthink where you've invested a few dollars that might not even be there next year when you got this guy available.
And I think there's a big gap between Jalen Carter and Tyree Wilson, if we're being honest. Like, I think there's a clear tier 1 with him and Will Anderson Jr., and I think after that is tier 2 with Tyree Wilson. So I think the Seahawks, who need blue chip guys in their defense, especially on the defensive line, I think you can't pass it up no matter how much you've invested into the D tackle position.
Yeah, I agree. Our breakdown on Tyree Wilson will be out in a little while, and we like him. We do like him, but I mean, I think there's a pretty large difference in terms of how ready these guys are to make major impacts in the NFL. All right. At 6, we've got the defensive tackle, defensive tackle. I just read Detroit and said defensive tackle. I'm tired too, Kyron. Not for staying up late watching TV, but all right. At pick 6, we have the Detroit Lions taking cornerback Devon Witherspoon. All right. So, I think especially since Daniel Jeremiah put out that he views Devon Witherspoon as his number 1 corner, we're seeing him mocked more and more as the first off the board. And the Lions do need corner help. Despite spending in free agency, I see that more as covering all their bases than saying like this is no longer a position we need to prioritize. I think they need big time corner, presence on the outside there. So I think this is a great pick. But why do you think the Lions would select Devon Witherspoon?
So, I mean, if Donnie hated my Jalen Carter pick, he's probably going to hate this because of how much they spent at corner and free agency. But I do want to point out a lot of those deals were 1-year deals. So this isn't like it's a long-term investment they've made at corner. Like you said, it is kind of just covering their bases for the season. And it's pretty funny now that the Lions actually have the 4th best odds to win the NFC next year. So this is a team that could compete next year for sure, and it would potentially even win that division. So, I think Devon Witherspoon is a guy that I think is CB1. And not only that, but man, the fit in Detroit is awesome. Like, I could see Dan Campbell watching Witherspoon's tape and being like pounding the table for that guy because he seems like a Dan Campbell corner. The guy is as physical as they come. I've never seen a corner, I think, lay the hit stick more than Devon Witherspoon. And he's a dominant press coverage corner. Actually, we have a stat at PFF. I think he had over 120 press coverage snaps this past season. And on those snaps, he only allowed 1 yard on all 120 of those snaps. So dominant press coverage corner. Like I said, I think Dan Campbell's going to love this guy because of his attitude. He's got that, CB1 mentality that you look for. And I just think he's a perfect fit in Detroit. I do think corner is still a need, even though they've invested so much, just because I don't think it's a long-term investment they made at corner. So I still think that this is a pick that if Jalen Carter is off the board here, which he is in this scenario, I think this is a good pick for Detroit to take Witherspoon here and make a long-term investment at corner. And hopefully Jeff Okudah can, become a top corner like we thought he could be coming out of Ohio State too.
Kyron, what you think?
No, I 100% agree. This is a perfect fit. He's one of my favorite guys. I talked about him and Brian Branch with Max. We did a stream the other day. I haven't seen 2 corners and defensive backs in general that are willing to come tackle and hit like these guys are. Devin Witherspoon and Brian Branch, I can't believe how like active they are in the run game as well. I think they're going to help out a team in the run game as much as anything. Like having lockdown corners are going to be great, but having guys that can make up for deficiencies on the edge, or maybe a linebacker that can kind of stop a 6 or 7 yard game from becoming a 20-yard game. Those are the difference between winning and losing football games. So those guys are going to help you do things like that. So I love his game. I love his fit. Really good situation here. And I do agree with you. I think it's a little different from Seattle. They did pay Draymond Jones a lot of money to be on the interior.
Yeah.
So when you bring back both of those, that's a little different. But I do agree with you here because they invested in the cornerback position, but it's very, very small. So those get, and then in the cornerback position, it's like there's enough for everybody to go around. You have to have 5 or 6 corners now anyway in the NFL. You have to be able to go nickel a lot of times and really match up people. And so I think it's a really good spot for him, and I think it's a really good fit for what Aaron Glenn and that defense is doing, because the second half of that season, they really started to turn the corner and figure it out. And a lot of that was due to, just being better communicators on the back end and having improved DD play. So with even better players on the back end, you can only assume that they're going to get better. So really looking forward to seeing the Lions play this year.
Yep, agreed. I think it's a great fit. I think that, the caliber of player warrants the pick. And I just think that, it'd be tough to make an argument to go in any other direction. But maybe if he's not there, we will see what would happen. But there's probably 2 corners worthy of it either way. All right. Back to the quarterback discussion, Kyron's favorite thing to talk about in the entire world. We have the Raiders selecting Will Levis, the quarterback from Kentucky, at 7. So, again, no trades in this mock, so they get their guy there at 7. I believe that we had the same thing happening. We didn't have anybody jumping up to go get him. But, you said that you were at the pro day, kind of heard some things, saw some things. So what is your take on Will Levis and what's going on with him?
I don't think he's going to be a Raider. I would be surprised actually at this point. And it was going into the pro day, I really thought he could be a Raider. And then the fact that he didn't send anyone, at least from what I saw, and from what I saw on Twitter, that nobody else saw Raiders people there either. So that was eye-opening. And maybe maybe they said, okay, we have all the tape we want. Maybe they don't want to tip their hand by sending, I know the Panthers sent 15 people to Stroud's pro day, which is like 9 more than any other team. And that kind of was like, okay, like, all right. But the Raiders maybe didn't want to tip their hand because maybe they want to trade up. I don't know. I mean, they probably already met. I know they met with him actually at the combine. So maybe they got everything they need and they don't need to see their pro day. But still, it's a potential franchise quarterback. You probably want to get everything you can on the guy. So that was eye opening. I don't think they're going to take him. I would take him here at 7. I think Levis is an interesting case, of course, because he just didn't play well this last year. But of course, and the footwork was all over the place. But I think there's serious excuses, real excuses you can make for him. The footwork was all over the place, but also he played with turf toe the entire year. So maybe that affected his footwork. The offensive line at Kentucky was abysmal, as I'm sure Kyron can go into this past season. The weapons he was throwing to were abysmal. The coaching was abysmal he had this past season. So he had everything going against him, and I think situation matters for him. And he's a guy that the year before, when he had Wan'Dale Robinson, he was an elite quarterback the year before, honestly, and probably should have declared that year. But I think Levis was, in a horrible situation at Kentucky this year. He had that injury in the turf toe, which might have messed up his footwork, which then messed up his accuracy. So I think his situation matters. Vegas has some pieces. Obviously, Devontae Adams there. They got to keep, building up that O-line. But I think that Levis could be a franchise quarterback. And I think the hate for him, I've seen a lot of people despise this kid. And I don't think that's very fair. I think he's still a top, 15 or so pick in the draft. And I think Vegas here probably should take him and let him learn behind Jimmy Garoppolo, at least for a little bit.
So this is interesting because Kyron has also said that he's heard it on good authority that they are interested in taking a quarterback. Mm-hmm. So if they're that obviously out on Will Levis, then what does that mean? Are we going to see an aggressive push to get up to 3? Because let's be honest, they're not getting any higher than that, right? So they would have to get all the way to 3 to ensure they get the guy they want, unless for some reason they're wildly confident that the Colts are going to take Will Levis over Anthony Richardson, right? So, Kyron, what do you make of what happened and what you've been hearing in the background?
Well, it's super interesting because I think to get the guy that they want, they would have to trade up. I know that they want to take a quarterback, but I also know that they're not very high on Levis at all. They don't like him. So it's it's a weird dichotomy here because you need to move up to get the guy that you want, which is Anthony Richardson. Because let's make no qualms about it. They like CJ, they like Bryce, but they're not going to be able to get him. They know that. And they need to take a quarterback because you don't want to be stuck with Jimmy G for the next 4 years. And I love Jimmy G. I love him. I think he's a winner. He's going to help the franchise at least be stable for the future as long as he's healthy and on the field. But you have to think about the future. What's coming after this? Are you going to be bad enough to be in this position again next year where you can possibly trade up? I don't know if they're going to be that bad. I don't know if they're going to be terrible and be able to be a top 3 pick next year. Who knows what was going to happen? So that's where the situation is. I know they want to take a quarterback, but I know that they don't like Will Levis. So either trade up for Anthony Richardson or stay here and you might be stuck with the guy that you have to take by default because it's just the best actual value and it's the best course of action for you to go, or end up taking, and this is the thing that kind of made it a little dicey for them. There's not a high-end tackle prospect this year that you just have to take it. So that's why it's like a little bit more difficult, or you have to think about it and consider your options more. I know a lot of people were really high on Paris Johnson Jr. after the season, after that Georgia game, but as the draft process has kind of gone along and you've kind of gone back and watched the film over the body of work over an entire career, it's kind of tapered off a little bit more and become a little bit more realistic. Everybody loves Skoronski, but there's a lot of debate if he's a guard or a tackle, and you don't really take a guard at 7 if you believe he's a guard. So it's a lot of variance here with the offensive line issues, and that's what's kind of holding them back as far as picking a guy right there. But presumably Jalen Carter's going to be off the board too. So if Jalen Carter's gone, you don't want to take a offensive lineman here. Will Levis might end up being the guy by default.
So maybe that's definitely possible. But if we are talking about the Raiders being this interested in moving up to 3, what does it take to get that done? Because I've heard a lot of speculation about what it takes for the Colts to go from 4 to 3. We talked about maybe just a 3rd round pick because then the Cardinals still feel like they get their blue chip prospect while also, getting an extra pick there. So maybe they're willing to just not be greedy with it, let's say. But in terms of the Raiders moving all the way up to 3, what does that take? And how much do they have to spend for the Cardinals to be willing to drop out of their blue chip range there?
That'd be tough. I'm wondering if it would take a first. Now, I'm very not well versed in the draft trade. I'm Brad Spielger, my coworker, is much better than I am in this, but it would take obviously substantially a lot more than it would with the Colts. But yeah, I mean, it could cost a lot. But if Kyron, like Kyron said, like I also believe that they aren't as into Will Levis as other people think, and I think the pro day kind of proved that to an extent. So yeah, maybe if they really want Richardson and they know that if they don't get Richardson, the Colts are going to take him, and then they're stuck with Levis if they have to take a quarterback. So yeah, they might be desperate, and then that way, Arizona could move all the way down to 7.
Yeah. So just looking at Brad's chart here. So Brad did a collaborative trade value chart with Jason Fitzgerald from Over the Cap before he was working at PFF. And according to them, this is their chart. And I don't think it always corresponds with what actually happens in the NFL. But if we're working off of that at the very least, then the 3rd overall pick is worth 2,443 points. And the 7th overall pick is worth 2,014 points. So we have a disparity of about 429, let's call it 430 points. According to his value chart, that would be the equivalent of that would be approximately in the late 50s or late 150s to 160. So, I'm not sure that necessarily correlates to what we can expect from the real world playing out, right? But that's not that high of a price. Then if you look at, let's see, some of the more standard versions of the chart, you're looking at a discrepancy of 2,200 minus 1,500. So we're looking at about 700 in terms of trade value. So that is a late 1st round pick, or you're looking at, potentially a 2nd and a 3rd round pick, or a 1st round pick in the next year. So there is a pretty large difference in terms of what they deem viable trade value versus what tradition has told us is trade value in the NFL. So it's hard to know exactly where to draw from in terms of what to expect. But it is a curious thing. I mean, Kyron, if you're the Raiders and you're going up to 3rd overall to get Anthony Richardson. What are you willing to give up if you're in Las Vegas?
I just know I'm not willing to give up a first. I mean, it's just not worth it at that point. I don't think anybody in this draft outside of Bryce or CJ Stroud is good enough to be giving up future first, especially with the quarterbacks coming in the next year or two. I don't think that any of these guys are good enough passes to be given up first. So if you can get them for a 3rd, maybe a 2nd, maybe a 3rd and a 5th, something like that, maybe I would be willing to do that. But anything past that is not really on my board, especially for a team like the Raiders, who's cash strapped. You're not going to be able to get a bunch of high-profile free agents. You're not going to be able to get pay a bunch of your guys that you really like in the future. I think you either need to tank fully and then bet on Drake May or Caleb Williams next year, betting on getting in the top 3 to take one of those guys, or you trade up, you give up as much as you can realistically, and you trade up for Anthony Richardson and put all your eggs in that basket. Anything other than that, I'd rather you just go corner at 7 if you have to stay put and you don't want to take Will Levis. So because you do have a need in the secondary. So that would be my logic here. If you want to take a quarterback and you aren't able to get trade up and get Anthony Richardson, and you don't want to take Will Levis, just go corner here. Because Christian Gonzalez here on the board. We have some other guys, maybe a Tyree Wilson. You could put him opposite, because this will be Chandler Jones last year. Put him opposite Max Crosby for the next 5 years. That could be something you could be enticed about. Something of that sort. But don't just take the quarterback because you want to take a quarterback and you don't want to give up much for him. That would be my logic here, because the quarterbacks coming in the next 3 or 4 years are going to be insane coming off the board. So especially like what's my guy in at Clemson. I'm drawing a blank right now. Jay Klubnik, and in 2 years he's going to be one of those guys up there. So with the quarterbacks coming in the future, I wouldn't invest too much past a 3rd and a 5th, to be honest.
All right. Well, I mean, I hear you. I think Donnie's right. I think the Cardinals will 100% be pressing for that 2024 first rounder. I mean, they've got some rebuilding to do themselves. So it kind of does feel like it's going to be the Colts moving up slightly, unless the Raiders are really ready to get down and dirty and move some assets to go up and get them. So we shall see. This is going to be an interesting conversation going forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if we find out before the draft who's moving up to 3 to get that player. All right. Then we have at pick number 8, the Atlanta Falcons selecting Tyree Wilson, the edge out of Texas Tech. This has been a pretty popular slot, and we do like Tyree Wilson. I do think that there is projection there for sure, but you see a lot of special traits on tape, ridiculous length. So why do you think Wilson is a great fit for the Atlanta Falcons here at 8?
I just think they need defensive talent wherever, honestly. And at this point, it's almost like take the best defensive player left on the board if you're Atlanta. And that for me is easily Tyree Wilson. I mentioned before how I think it was a clear tier 1 with Anderson and Carter. I think it was almost a clear tier 2 here with Tyree Wilson, at least in terms of the front 7 players. So I think this is a guy Atlanta desperate. I can't remember the last time Atlanta had like an elite pass rusher at the edge defender position. So Tyree Wilson, like you mentioned before, he's got really amazing tools. His length is ridiculous. But also, like, he did dominate this year at Texas Tech. Like, he was a phenomenal pass rusher for them, very consistent pass rusher, and also a dominant run defender, too. It's some of the most tackles for loss in the entire country. So I think he's a guy that, the tools were all there. You want to see him obviously develop a little bit more to become maybe a guy that's on the level of maybe an Anderson or a Carter. But he's got all the tools, and I think Atlanta needs help in that front 7, man. So at this point, it's basically whoever falls in your lap here at 8 is who you're going to take, because I think they need defensive help that badly.
Yeah. Kyron?
I don't know. I'm not nearly as high on Wilson as a lot of people are. Like, I just, when people talk about Tyree Wilson and they show you clips of Tyree Wilson, what game do they always go to? It's one game. You see TCU game, you see those purple helmets, and it's all everybody ever shows because that was his best game by far. I don't think he's nearly as consistent as a lot of people claim he is. I don't know if that's just due to the talent disparity. I don't think that the Big 12 is that great of an offensive line conference at all. I think the best offensive line is probably TCU game. TCU, so I think he had his best game against the best talent. But you turn on some of the other film, he doesn't look nearly as good. The Oklahoma State game didn't really look great to me. There's something about him. I just don't know. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I don't get it. So when I watch it, I get the natural ability with some of the athleticism, and I get the stature. You can't teach that stature. He's 6'5", 275. You can't teach a build like that, right? but it's just something about him. I don't see a refined football player, and that's the only problem that I have with it, because you don't take a guy like that in the top 8. Like if he's there at 20 or 25, then heck yeah, you take a chance on a guy like this with these natural traits. But I don't necessarily see a guy that I would take a top 10 pick on. And I see a lot of people have had him marked as high as 4 or 5. So it's very interesting seeing how, and I see also a lot of people have him late first round. So it's a big discrepancy here with people where they see him and where they see him fitting in. But I do agree with you. I see what you're talking about. He has ability, he has tools, but I only want to talk about tools, and I'm talking about a quarterback, because that's the most important position on the field. And you need to be able to mold a guy like that, like we talk about Will Levis. You have to consider his tools, because those type of tools don't come around a lot of times. You can get a really good defensive end in the second round, third round sometimes. So it's interesting to see like where people value positions, because I don't think he's quite good enough to go top 10, but I do think he could be molded into that. So that's the allure of it. I get it. But just the way I've been taught, the way I've been conditioned and programmed, my entire football brain is like, take the best football players right now. So I get it, but I wouldn't take them at 8.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I get that. I mean, I really do understand it. When we broke him down, I'm kind of teasing, a video that's going to be released fairly soon, but he is a really good run defender, right? He's stout, and there's really no question about that. But we've seen guys be able to manage that and be taken later in the first round. The question is, what does his pass rush repertoire look like? And I think with him, you see certain moves that he's really comfortable with. Over the course of a game, he will try and set you up and then do something different based off of what his setup is. I wouldn't say it's an ultra refined pass rush plan over the course of a game, but he's got some. And I think really where he lacks right now are counter moves. So if his initial move is beat, I don't see him turning to something else quickly, like in play, right? So I think if you want a dominant pass rusher, you're going to need a guy who either has like a couple of moves that are basically unstoppable. I wouldn't say he's quite there with any of his moves, or you need a guy who knows how to, counter mid-play. And I think if I say he's not consistent, it's that he's not consistently dominant, right? But I do think that there are plays here and there where he definitely can win just with his physicality alone and the moves that he has developed. But I'm not sure that, you can expect big time impact in year one. And for
Hold on, real quick, guys. Did Lamar Jackson just tweeted that he wants to trade from the Ravens? Holy
Heck yeah.
crap.
Yo, so let me ask you a question, Max. I love Nolan Smith as a prospect. How big of a gap do you think the Nolan Smith is from Tyree Wilson? I think Nolan Smith at 20 or 17 or 20 is a much better value pick than a Tyree Wilson top 10. What do you think about the disparity?
I would agree with that. And I have Nolan Smith, just a spoiler, I have Nolan Smith going pretty low. And I have him lower than I would want him to go, honestly. Like I said, I threw this together pretty. We'll get into the next pick, and I kind of regret the next pick I have here. But yeah, the Nolan Smith, I think his tools are ridiculous. If you want to talk about a run defender, Nolan Smith is one of the best in that class. And he's shown, obviously, the tools to be a really good pass rusher. So, yeah, I don't think the gap is that big between him and Tyree Wilson. I do think Wilson's tape, I at least like Wilson's tape a little bit more. And I don't think he's as far away. I don't think Nolan Smith is far away either. But I don't think the gap there is large at all. I just think, there are a lot of teams coming up that just didn't really need help on the D-line. That's why there's a big gap, at least in this mock draft, between Wilson and Nolan Smith. But I don't think in reality there really isn't that big of a gap between Wilson and Nolan Smith in terms of how good they are.
Gotcha.
Well, I think that you look at Nolan Smith and you can't project him to be a dominant 3-down player at the defensive end position, right? Like that's just not what his role is going to be. I think if you want to have him at an outside linebacker, he can play the run, but I just don't think that he's going to be dominant in both facets. And I think that you can look at a player like Tyree Wilson and you can project that. It's not a lock, but it's a possibility. And I just don't think that that's the case for Smith because he's just not big enough, right? So his role is slightly more specific. You take him for the pass rushing. Do I think that he could go higher than 20? Yeah, I think there's a very high possibility because, I love his motor. You know what I mean? He's got a lot going for him. But we also do know that scouts adore traits for the defensive end position, right? We just know it's not. It's the Jaguars were not the only team that thought that Trevon Walker was worth a top pick like that based off of those traits. So it's just we know what to expect. We know how a lot of the league views these players, right? Do coaches feel the same way? I don't know. Maybe not. Some do. Probably some. Definitely some don't. But from a scouting perspective and a front office perspective, I think it's a reality that we live in, and it's worked out for a lot of guys. All right. So at 9 here, you have the Chicago Bears taking Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver from Ohio State. And so while they did get DJ Moore in the trade, moving out of first overall, they go out and get another talent at the receiver position for either Justin Fields or whoever it is that they eventually move on to if it doesn't work out. And I know that people don't like to hear that, but there's plenty of time for Fields to develop. We'll see. But how do you foresee Jackson Smith-Njigba fitting into this offense?
So this I mentioned it before. I kind of regret this, and I do, but I do kind of love the fit here because when I was doing this mock draft on the PFF mock draft simulator, I was like, okay, Fields and JSN, like, yeah, hell yeah, that'll be awesome. I do kind of, the more I think about it now, and after watching, actually we put out a mock draft yesterday at PFF, the NFL Stock Exchange. They went with the bootleg guys, and they were talking about it a little bit too. And it's just like, okay, I understand you probably don't want to go receiver here because you got DJ Moore, you got Darnell Mooney still there, and you got Chase Claypool, and you've invested a lot in almost all of those guys. Where DJ Moore, you trade a lot for him. Chase Claypool, they basically traded a first-round pick for him because they had the 32nd overall. Yeah, it's insane. And I'm a Steelers fan. I was over the moon with that trade.
Just to pay Edmonds for the money they could have paid Roquan.
Yeah,
crazy stuff. Anyway, go ahead. My bad.
I do think Ryan Poles is getting a little overrated with some of the moves he's been doing right now because obviously he got a ton of players because he has that much cap space, but it's like, okay, but like who is he actually paying here? But yeah, I agree with you. But the JSN, then if you draft JSN, and it's so dumb that I'm making criticizing my own pick, but it's like if you draft JSN, then all of a sudden one of those three guys is the odd man out, basically. Because I don't think the Bears will be running a lot of 4 wide receiver sets at least next year. So one of those guys is the odd man out, and you've invested so much in DJ Moore, you've invested so much in Chase Claypool, and I really like Darnell Mooney. And then obviously JSN and being a top 10 pick, you probably want to have on the field too. So one of those guys is the odd man out, and you need help on the offensive line. So if I could redo it, I would take Peter Skoronski. Obviously the Chicago connection being from Chicago and going to Northwestern. And I think he's the best offensive lineman in this draft. I'm curious what Kyron thinks, but and we'll get into him in a little bit. But yeah, I think JSN's still a good pick for them. I would not hate this pick if they take him at 9, but if I could redo it, I'd probably take an offensive lineman because I do think they really need help on the offensive line. And Skoronski would fit not only as a tackle for them, but if they have a right tackle. Yeah, go ahead.
Tackle or guard, because this is the big debate. I got into some heated discussions in my group chats and in my text threads with some personnel guys, but it's very highly contested right now where they see him fitting because of the arm length. It's not about athletic ability. If you look at his athletic ability, what he did at the combine shocked a lot of people. He had a very, very strong combine. And if you go look at the tape, I have a guy who used to work for Notre Dame, right? And they wouldn't offer him to play tackle. They wanted him to play inside a guard, which is why he ended up going to Northwestern. So kind of like he keeps using this guy and his criteria as the end all be all. But I'm like, he went to Northwestern and became the best tackle in college football. He can play tackle. We just did this with Rashawn Slater. Rashawn Slater had 33-inch arms, and that's why Rashawn Slater fell. So now he's already an all-pro as a rookie, one of the best tackles in football. I just don't want people to fall into the thing like measurables and RAS scores and everything. They're really cool, right? You have these criteria, but look at the football player. I think he can play either or. And it's like if you want him to play guard, and that's where your fit is, he can do it and he can excel there. I think he can be a great guard in this league. But if you need a tackle, the guy can play tackle as well. We just saw it for 4 years in college, and he turned out to be the best tackle in football. So I just wanted to hear what your thoughts about tackle or guard.
I completely agree with you. I think he deserves a chance at tackle, and I think that you just mentioned it. We saw the same thing with Sean Slater, his teammate, who did the same thing. We're like, oh, I don't know if he could be a good tackle in the NFL, but we know he could be an All-Pro guard, and obviously he's an All-Pro tackle too. I'm not saying Skoronski will live up to that level, but he definitely could. He definitely could. I think he also could be an All-Pro guard, but I think he could also be a really awesome tackle in the NFL as well. And I think. You mentioned like Rashawn Slater opted out of that season, and that kind of screwed Northwestern a little bit, saying, we thought we had this top 10 pick at tackle. Now we don't. They threw out a true freshman in Peter Skoronski at left tackle, which any left tackle in the Big Ten is going to have a difficult time with how good the edge defenders and how good the defensive linemen are in the Big Ten, let alone a true freshman offensive tackle. And yet Peter Skoronski was still phenomenal in his freshman year. Then he backed it up with an awesome sophomore year. And then, like you mentioned, this year, he's like the best pass protector in college football this past year. So, yeah, I think he clearly deserves a shot at tackle. I think he is the best offensive lineman in the draft. And I understand the issues with arm length, but, like, I think tape-wise, I don't think there's a better offensive lineman in this draft than him. And I think he's dominant. I think he deserves to be the top offensive lineman taken.
Even I'll just throw this out there really quick. Jamari Salyer, I know he fell because of medical. He had a really busted up shoulder. But everybody was hell-bent on throwing him inside a guard. And then he gets out. Rashawn Slater gets hurt. They have him in the 6th round. They throw him out there at left tackle. He grades out as one of the better left tackles in the NFL over the course of the season. Like, duh, did you watch the Georgia tape? Look what he did against Aiden Hutchinson, Will Anderson, those guys. So I feel like people overthink it a little bit with the measurables. Look at what these guys are as football players, who they did it against, and the systems they did it in, and then go from there.
I agree.
Yeah, I think you also, when you look at traits for a tackle, you need length, you need athleticism. Do you have to have both? Well, not if you necessarily operate well with one of them. If you have neither, then you probably are limited to being an interior player. If you can't move to the spot where you need to be, or at least reach the spot that you need to be at, you're probably gonna have a problem. But if you got at least one, then I don't know what the debate is here. And the testing was definitely good enough, and we saw it on film that I think Skoronski is worthy of the pick. So it's funny that we're talking so much about Skoronski. He isn't even the pick.
I know. Again, I'm sorry I messed up on this pick, but JSN is still a great pick. I love JSN. I think he's clearly the top receiver. I think he is a top receiver in this draft. I think a lot of people are discounting just how dominant he was in that sophomore season. And I'm not comparing him to this guy because it'd be ridiculous, but like, you remember when Jamar Chase was like clearly the best receiver in the country on a team that had Justin Jefferson, who was a year older than him? That's kind of what JSN did, where he was the best receiver in college football, I thought, last year, with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, who were both older than him. And Olave was 2 years older than him. And you see how good Olave and Wilson are already in the NFL. And yet it was JSN who led all Power 5 receivers in receiving yards that year. So I think JSN
state records.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think JSN, I'm not comparing him to Jamar Chase, but like, you got to look back at that tape, man. He was dominant in that year. And I think he's the best receiver in the draft. And I know he only played 60 snaps this past season, but that shouldn't discount just how special of a receiver he is. I think he could immediately be one of the top slot receivers in the NFL. And maybe he could play on the outside too. We haven't really seen it yet from him. But we had the same questions with Justin Jefferson, and he's doing just fine in Minnesota. So I think JSN is a clear top 10 pick, or should be around that range at least. So I think that, Chicago taking him here at 9 would not hate that at all. And I can see him being maybe the number 1 receiver in Chicago in a couple years. I love DJ Moore, but I think JSN is a special talent.
Yeah, I love Jackson Smith and Jigba. The one thing that I wonder, and maybe this is, maybe you just do this anyway and just say either he's going to develop with him or our next guy will. But I think to really get the most out of JSN, you need a quarterback who has great timing.
Yeah.
Because I just think that what Njigba is able to do, getting open, getting the ball in transition, then turning up the field, like there is going to be a lot of yards left on the field if you don't have a guy who can do that. And while Fields is definitely accurate and has a great arm, I don't think timing is a great part of his game right now. So that's just one thing that I would say. But ultimately, if he falls because he didn't have a great 40 time, then somebody's just going to be stoked to get him because he is awesome. He's so good.
He reminds me, my unnecessary comp for him is DeAndre Hopkins. I think they athletically, their route running ability, how they get open, how they just find space. I think I called him Baby D-Hop that whole 2021 season. So I would love to see him fall to probably 12 with the Texans, so
Yeah,
they can match him with whoever they take. That would be my ideal situation for Jackson Smith and Jigba, but I 100% agree he's the best wide receiver in this draft.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think it's not even close, to be honest.
Here why.
Okay.
I think he would be the 12th. If I could read you this, he would be the 12th pick, and I think him with probably Bryce Young in real life, I think that'd be pretty awesome. I love that. Yeah.
All right. So at pick number 10, we have the Philadelphia Eagles drafting Brian Branch. We know this is what you would do, and not what would you expect to happen.
I knew this would be a Kyron pick. I knew you would love this pick. Kyron, I'm in lockstep with you, dude. Brian Branch, Kyron leaves the screen right now, but Brian Branch, I think, is clearly nearly a top 10 pick in this draft. And I don't think he will be, unfortunately, but man, he is awesome. I think he's clearly the best safety in this draft. He could play in the slot as well, which, by the way, the Eagles just lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson to the Lions. They could kind of use that right now. So I think that obviously Christian Gonzalez has been mocked to them a lot. They did bring back James Bradbury and Darius Slay, but obviously both of them I don't think will be there long term. I do think Brian Branch is a guy, though, that would be really good for a team that just lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson. So it's really good short term because this is a team that could still make a run to the Super Bowl potentially, as they just did. They still have Super Bowl aspirations. And also long term, I think this is a slam dunk, top guy. And I think he's a better prospect, honestly, than Christian Gonzalez is. I love Brian Branch. I think he's an absolute superstar. I think he's being underrated right now by a lot of people. And the Eagles, I would love to see him in Philadelphia in that secondary with Darius Slay and James Bradbury. So this is kind of an awesome pick, I think, short-term and long-term for them. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think this is going to be that would be a really cool fit, I think, with Brian Branch.
Kyron, what do you think?
No, 100% agree. And I think it's just because of his versatility, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that Chauncey Gardner-Johnson brought, I think he brings it. I think he's a better tackler. That's crazy to say because he has to do it in the NFL. But from what I saw from him at Alabama, his versatility, people don't remember how great Malachi Moore was his freshman year. Malachi Moore was projected to be a first-round pick based off of that year. He came in and basically took over the fold from a guy that's projected that probably still will be a first-round, a high second-round pick next year, and kind of just took that mold and just ran with it. He's a Saban guy through and through. When you get that Saban stamp and you have that approval, and I think he tested out fairly well. He's a lot bigger than people give him credit for. So he's a legit 6 foot, legit 195, 200 pounds, and he's very athletic. He did a really good job in his testing. And if you look at the on-field drills at the pro day, at the combine, there wasn't anybody that was as smooth as him. He had the best gauntlet in the entire combine, and that's wide receivers included. He has really good ball skills. He's really balanced. He has really good tackling ability, and he's just so versatile. I think he's a perfect fit for the Eagles and what they need and what they can have going forward because, like you said, there's going to be a lot of turnover in that secondary over the next 2 or 3 years. And if you could stamp a guy like that in and kind of build around his skill set and what he's able to do, he reminds me a little bit of a Tyrann Mathieu type, but he's bigger and stronger. He could be that playmaker for them, and I really like that pick.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I just don't think that there's really any chance that the Eagles are going to spend a top 10, a first-round pick probably, but let alone a top 10 pick on safety. So in terms of predictive nature, I think we could probably all agree that this is unlikely to happen.
Yeah.
But the fit's great, and the player is very good too. So, Donnie says, looks like we all have different opinions. But, hey, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the nature of draft season, right? We're all coming at this from a different perspective. It's tough to convince me to take a safety in the top 10 as well. But, I mean, just based on the team itself, I think we could be pretty confident that that's not going to happen. But that leaves... Let's see here. That leaves the Tennessee Titans with the top-rated offensive tackle on the board. So they get Peter Skoronski here, which I'm sure that they would be thrilled with. If they don't get their quarterback, then a top-tier offensive lineman who can play multiple positions has got to be a major boon for them because their offensive line, which they were known for a number of years under Vrabel, has kind of fallen apart here, there. Guys have walked in free agency, guys have been released, guys have been they moved on. The majority of that starting O-line from their major runs are just not there anymore. And one of their major investments at the position also just hasn't worked out. So they really need to revisit it, I think. And so regardless of whether it's Peter Skoronski or somebody else, I think it makes a lot of sense. But what do you think, Max, about Peter Skoronski going to the Titans? Do you think that they would ultimately like a player of his size, or do you think they would lean towards one of the bigger guys?
That's an interesting question, actually. I didn't really think about that. I was just kind of taking the best available one here. But yeah, I would still take Skoronski here just because of how good his tape is. And I think Vrabel will recognize that. And obviously, we don't spend too much time because we basically just did the entire Skoronski thing with Chicago. But I think Skoronski is, like I said, I think he's clearly the best offensive lineman in this class. They desperately need help on the offensive line. I mean, they brought in Andre Dillard, who hasn't really done much for the Eagles so far. Nicholas Petit-Frere, they invested in at last year as well, but he was only a third-round pick and he didn't play great in his rookie year. So they need help on the offensive line. I think at 11 here, I think almost no matter what, they're going to probably be taking an offensive lineman unless they trade up for a quarterback. But I think that Skoronski, if he falls here, will be a dream selection for them. If I could redo it, he wouldn't be falling here, and maybe they got to go with someone like Paris Johnson Jr. or Broderick Jones. But I would, this kind of be a sprint the card in situation for the Titans if I was them.
Yeah, and I think we kind of already know how you feel, Kyron. I mean, you don't think that they would prioritize anybody else over Skoronski just because they like the big bullies or anything like that?
I don't know. I think Broderick Jones is my clear second guy. So I think that if Peter Skoronski is gone, then I think Broderick Jones is definitely the guy you take here. But like you said, they've lost over the last 2 years. They've lost Taylor Lewan, Roger Saffold, Ben Jones, Nate Davis. So literally 4 starters have gone. So you have to retool in some capacity. If they don't trade up to get a quarterback, you have to go offensive lineman. And I don't know if Peter Skoronski will be here, but it will be interesting if he is here to see if they value Broderick Jones in that build or Paris Johnson Jr. in that build over Peter Skoronski, because tackles are a premium. So if they see him as a guard, I don't know if Vrabel would take a guard there. So it'll be interesting to see. But if he's there, I don't think you can go wrong with him or Broderick Jones there at that pick. And I'll be happy to see him go to a team that needs to be rebuilding the offensive line and that has that culture and that mean streak, that just that dynamic that you like. It would be perfect for Peter Skoronski to go to a situation like that. So either or, I'll be happy with him or Broderick Jones here. But love Peter Skoronski, obviously, and we don't have to spend too much more time on it, but really like Pete.
All right. So that means at pick number 12, we have Quentin Johnston going to the Houston Texans, the wide receiver out of TCU. So he stays in the same state. So, we talked about Jackson Smith being Jigba being a good fit there. Quentin Johnston is a very different style of player. But how do you see this fit working out with the Houston Texans?
It'll be interesting. I think Quentin Johnston, I don't think he's wide receiver one. I think a lot of people think he is wide receiver one. I can see a lot of teams think he's wide receiver one as well. But I think he's a pretty clear cut behind Njigba, in my opinion. And then you could order the other guys. And I know the next receiver I have going is much later. But I think he's close to Addison and Zay Flowers and Josh Downs and all those guys. So I think Johnston here, at 12, I think Texans almost need to take they don't need to take one because they got needs a lot of other places too. But I think they should take a receiver here to help out whatever quarterback they take. In this situation, will be CJ Stroud. Johnston got the highest ceiling of any receiver. Obviously, the floor is up in the air. But, I think he's a guy that he's a big body. He's very fast. A lot of the nuances in being a receiver he still doesn't quite have yet. So there is some boom or bust potential there. But I think he's a guy that, you put him with a Bryce Young or you put him with a CJ Stroud and he could succeed there. So I like Quentin Johnston. This is maybe around the range or maybe a little higher than I would take him. But if you're the Houston and Njigba's off the board like he is in this scenario, then I would probably take the next guy. And that probably for me be Quentin Johnston with just how high his ceiling is. And I think there's a chance he does reach that ceiling with, a quarterback like Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. So that's kind of why I kind of like the fit here for Houston.
Yeah, I think Johnston's got a lot of work to do. The one thing that concerns me is when you look at his size, physicality at the catch point is not something that he's necessarily dominant with. So it's like, if you're kind of drafting someone with that projection, I'm a little worried about what that'll look like going up against even more physical, challenging competition. So it's not that I dislike him as a prospect, but I think that he's a guy that I'd take much closer to the second round than in the top 15 personally. So there are tools to work with there, but I can't say that I'm totally sold on him. But at the very least, I think the Texans do need to invest at receiver because they brought in those veteran guys. They brought in guys to help with the development, but they don't have anybody that's going to be able to grow with their young quarterback. They don't have anybody right now who can be a real difference maker at the position. And upside, certainly Quentin Johnston could be that. Kyron, what do you think about Quentin Johnston?
It's funny. I was talking to my guy, DJ Bienemy, who covers the Texans. We were talking 2 weeks before the draft, the combine, and we were kind of talking about. He asked me what I thought about him, and I was like, I like him, don't love him, and he was like, he doesn't play like a 6'4" wide receiver. And then we get to the combine 2 weeks later, and he's not 6'4", he's 6'2" and a half, and it kind of explains a little bit of the stuff that you see on the film, like you talked about the contested catches and going up and get those big balls. He's not a guy that does that because he's probably not a guy that can do that with his natural ability. And then you get to the combine, he's inch and a half, 2 inches shorter than we thought he was going to be. He didn't run the 40, so we don't know what his top end speed is, even though the game speed is obviously very apparent on tape. When he gets the ball in his hands, he's very good after the catch. He can make stuff happen, and he's very good breaking away from guys. But I think a little bit of the questions that you had on film were answered in the pre-draft process, and this is probably why he's going to fall a little bit. But I do like him. I think the floor for him, I think, is, I don't know, man. He reminds me of Kevin White coming out, like the natural ability, what we thought about that guy, what he could be, as opposed to what he is and what we've seen on tape. Who knows? I think a perfect fit for him would be with Giants, with the Brian Dable type that can scheme him open. He's not going to be wide receiver one in terms of getting 10 to 15 targets a game, but getting him the ball, getting him some easy looks, getting him on some rollout stuff, some play action where you can get him the ball in space and let him roll a little bit. I think that would be a perfect fit for him. But if you're talking about taking a guy like him at 12, I do understand it with the upside because, like we said, if you get a CJ Stroud or Bryce Young with him, that'll probably max out his ability and what he's able to do. So it's all about preference here. I'm a little bit higher on Addison than a lot of people are. I think Addison is like Stephon Diggs light. He reminds me of Stephon Diggs. He's around the same speed, around the same size. I think they have a lot of the same ability. Do I think he'll be Stephon Diggs on the next level? I don't. But I think he could be in that range where you can take a guy like Addison here, and I wouldn't necessarily be mad at it. But it'll be interesting to see how he goes, how high he goes, or if he falls a little bit because of those concerns. But I like him. I don't love him, but I would understand the pick here for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree.
All right. So next up, we have the New York Jets taking Paris Johnson Jr., the tackle out of Ohio State. So I definitely feel like the Jets need a tackle. They have 4 projected starters who are viable for 2023. They still need a center. But even so, you don't have to lock yourself into another season of Dwayne Brown. He's getting a little bit older. So if you do make a pick and you've got a new starting tackle, great. Or you can keep both, run into the season, and see how Mekhi Becton holds up through injury throughout the entire year. We'll see if he's a player who can actually play a full season, which is something we haven't seen yet. So tackle is big for me. I haven't really broken down the offensive linemen yet. So Kyron and I will be doing that here shortly. So I don't necessarily have a major opinion myself on which one I would prefer between Broderick Jones or Paris Johnson. I know that you're a little higher on Broderick Jones, Kyron, but are you okay with this range for Paris Johnson to go? Do you think he's a viable selection as a top 15 pick?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't even be shocked if we see him go top 10. It wouldn't surprise me at all. But because he has that natural freakish ability, that natural size and length that you can't teach. And everybody, like I said, coaches are the most arrogant people on the planet. They think they can mold anybody into an all-pro if they have those things, which is why you have stuff like the combine and pro days where they go get looks at these guys in shorts. And, they think, hey, I can turn that guy into an all-pro. So if you're talking about first-team shorts All-American, first-team shorts All-Pro, he looks better than anybody doing that stuff. I mean, the clip went viral. I think it's a really silly drill, but they had him like jumping up, spinning around, and then getting to it. That was just absolutely silly, right? But it does show off some of his just raw, natural athletic ability. And I think a place like this would be really good for him. The only problem that I have is that the AFC East is not a place that you want to send a young tackle to go figure out how to play football. He's going up against Matthew Judon, those guys in New England. You're going to go up against Von Miller, presumably, if he's healthy, Greg Russo and those guys in Buffalo. And then we know what Jalen Phillips and those young guys in Miami, Andrew Van Ginkel coming off. He's a great third down rusher. Who knows with Melvin Ingram or Agba, the situation with those guys. But it's not a division where you want a young tackle to be out there figuring it out. But you're also in a position with the Jets, if he does go in there and he does survive and he does turn out to be the guy that you think he can be, you have your bookend tackle for presumably the next 8 to 10 years. So it's a really good situation for the Jets to be in. I think they can go a bevy of ways here, and they're talented enough everywhere where I wouldn't be surprised if they went like DB. I wouldn't be surprised if they went edge here. A guy like we talked about him a little bit earlier, a Nolan Smith, or if a Brian Branch is here, I wouldn't be shocked if you see a guy like that. I think he's better than Whitehead. I think he can do a lot of stuff and kind of maybe take him to another level there. So they have a lot of flexibility with this pick. But I do like Paris Johnson Jr. there. I think if you can get him there, especially if Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers is mobile enough. He's smart enough in the pocket to kind of help a young guy like that out. So it wouldn't be the worst pick here at all. I like Paris Johnson Jr. here.
No, I want to say, like, I know you like Broderick Jones more, and I really, those two is like flip a coin for me. I really think it's that close between the two of them. I have Broderick Jones going only a little bit later after this. So, I think those two are extremely close. I like Paris Johnson Jr. maybe a tad bit more. I think he's got some guard versatility too. He really played well at guard when he had to the year before for Ohio State. He played right guard for them, and they moved over to left tackle this year, and I think he played really well there as well. So I think Paris Johnson Jr., I probably in the tools I like a lot too. So I probably lean him a little bit over Broderick Jones, but like that is really, like I said, it's a coin flip for me. So I think Paris Johnson Jr., who played a little bit guard too, the Jets need that. That could be a good pick for them, and I think they kind of need tackle now because you're assuming you're getting Aaron Rodgers. That should happen potentially somewhat soon, maybe even after the draft is over, maybe because they'll have more or Packers have more leverage, or I don't know, but we'll see what happens there. But I think you want to get as much as you can to help Aaron Rodgers out, and that'd probably be help along the offensive line. And I think that Paris Johnson Jr. would be a decent pick here. I
just don't think they can justify not making a major investment. So if it's not here, then it's got to be in the second round. And we know that they just traded Elijah Moore to move up from the third to the second. So they'll have most likely a second round pick in this draft, even with the trade for Aaron Rodgers. So here or there, I think it does need to be a priority. Dom C says, is Paris Johnson a left tackle or a right tackle in the NFL? Kyron, I know that you have your opinions on flipping sides. What do you think his best fit is?
Well, the good thing with him is that he's young enough and he's, raw enough to where you can mold him either side. I think he has the athletic ability, number one. A lot of it is just like muscle memory, getting used to taking the sets and getting used to it. But the thing that can overcompensate for that and kind of make up for those deficiencies, just getting to know it, is just raw athleticism and length. And he has that. So I think he could play on either side in the NFL, just what you need him to do. But I do think if you're going to stick him at a right tackle, I think Penei Sewell was a lot like this in terms of his athletic ability. I always thought he was a right tackle. I think he struggled a lot more at left tackle, just because you're going to see a higher caliber of rusher there. But I think when you put him on the right side, you saw his athletic ability shine. You saw his run game ability shine. And that's kind of where I value Broderick Jones a little bit more than Paris Johnson Jr. He's better in the run game for sure, in my opinion. But if you're talking about right or left, I think he can play either, man, for sure. Just put him somewhere, mold him there, and let him stay there. Because switching sides is like, people act like it's the easiest thing to do, but we don't see it very often for a reason.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, and I think again, even if you got both tackles projected to start, this is absolutely a place to do it. So you have seal of approval from me, Paris Johnson Jr. going to the Jets at 13. All right, so let's hit another AFC East team. The New England Patriots are selecting Christian Gonzalez, cornerback out of Oregon. So this is a guy that I have watched. Nick and I just broke him down. So that's coming down the pipe here as well. Tools like crazy. Yeah. Incredibly gifted player in terms of athletic ability, great speed, great explosiveness. It translates, the hip fluidity is all there. I mean, everything that you want from a requisite number one corner who can match up with bigger receivers, can match up with faster receivers, can match up with pretty much anybody, and he's not going to be at a major disadvantage. So, I think we might see people get a little spoiled by the way that corners played early in the past couple of years. Don't necessarily know if that transition is going to be super, super smooth, but I think there's a real chance that he goes higher than this, and I think I would be fine with that too. But how do you think he fits in with the New England Patriots? Yeah, you mentioned before, I don't think this is where he's going to be. I think he's going to be probably a top 10 pick. I think, honestly, the Eagles are probably a team that I keep an eye on for them, even though they just brought back both their corners, like I mentioned before. But, for the Patriots, I think this is a great pick for them. I think, they still need help along the secondary. I know they've re-signed Jonathan Jones, but, you look at their cornerback room right now, it's like Jack Jones, who I thought was phenomenal in his rookie year. But, I mean, he was only a fourth-round pick, so it's not like you have a lot invested in him. But I like Jack Jones a lot. But Jonathan Jones, Marcus Jones, you got three Joneses, honestly, as your corners, and Miles Bryant and Jalen Mills as well. So, that's just not a secondary that,
you're very inspired by in the Patriots. So I think obviously a big need is wide receiver, and I very much thought about Jordan Addison here, but I like Gonzalez a little bit more as a prospect, and I think corner is also maybe just as big of a need as wide receiver. So especially when they got Gesicki coming in, who basically is a receiver at the tight end position, and Juju Smith-Schuster coming in as well. So they should still have more weapons. I'm not denying that, but they need help in the secondary. And as we've seen before, like I know this isn't a predictive mock draft, but like the Patriots don't like taking first round receivers. They almost never do it, in fact. And as much as we draft analysts clamor for them to do it because of how bad their weapons have been, they just don't do it. They think they could find guys in the day 2 and day 3 that could be gems for them, and they usually do, honestly. But like I could be wrong, but I think the last one they took was N'Keal Harry, right? And that was like the last pick of the first round, and that obviously did not work out for them. So this is a team that I don't think will take a receiver at 14. And if Christian Gonzalez is here, that seems like a Bill Belichick pick. You mentioned before, he's also very versatile. I think he's a great man corner, great zone corner too. Whereas I like Witherspoon a lot, but if you're in a very versatile scheme, you might prefer Christian Gonzalez over him because I think he could play press coverage and off coverage probably a little bit better than Witherspoon. I like Witherspoon's mentality a little bit more. I don't think Gonzalez has the killer mentality just yet. That's why I have Witherspoon above him. But I think Gonzalez is just that versatile freak athlete who can play in any scheme. So I think he'd be a great pick, and Bill Belichick would probably love the kid. And his mentality would improve under the greatest defensive coach of all time, Bill Belichick. So I think it's a home run pick for the Patriots if he falls here.
Kyron, what you think?
100%. I like the pick here. It will be very Patriot way, right? They love stocking up on defensive guys, especially DBs and defensive linemen. So I wouldn't be shocked if you see him. I think we mocked Andrew Van Ginkel, Andrew Van Ginkel, but he reminds me of him. Lucas Van Ness. We mocked Lucas Van Ness here, and I think Lucas Van Ness would be a good pick and a Patriot type pick. But I do think they go defense, and I think they either go Van Ness or best available corner. I wouldn't be shocked if you see a Joey Porter Jr. come off the board here. If he's the one that's available here, I think he would fit perfect in a Patriot system. So I do love the pick here, and if he's there, I don't think you think about it much at all. I don't think he'll be there, but if he is there, that's definitely a Bill Belichick type pick.
All right. So at 15, the Green Bay Packers select Michael Mayer, tight end from Notre Dame. So I'm curious to see what you think about Mayer going to the Packers. I know that this is a spot where he's been mocked previously. He's not my tight end one, I will say that. But I'm curious to see what you think that fit is like and why he will work there.
Yeah, he's still my tight end one, and I understand people who have Darnell Washington. I understand people who have Dalton Kincaid. I think Mike Renner, the lead draft analyst at PFF, actually has Dalton Kincaid as his tight end one. I personally still have Michael Mayer as tight end one. I think it's close, but I like Mayer a lot, and I think he does everything. He's a good enough athlete. He's not a great athlete like you see from a Darnell Washington or a Dalton Kincaid or someone of that mold, but I think that Michael Mayer is a good enough athlete. And then his tape, I think, has just been the best tape I've seen of any tight end over the last few years. And, of course, we'll get another one next year. Brock Bowers is who I think blows everyone out of the water, basically. But I think Michael Mayer is a phenomenal player. I think that the Packers need weapons, and they've invested a little bit in wide receiver, Christian Watson being there. They need a tight end as well. I think Mercedes Lewis right now is their tight end. So, they need a tight end. And now presumably you're in the Jordan Love era in Green Bay. You want to give him weapons. And I think he's a security blanket that Jordan Love would love. That was not meant as a pun, but I think he would love Jordan Love would love Michael Mayer in that offense. And I think he's a security blanket that you want to give a young quarterback like Jordan Love. So I think he's a good pick here for the Packers. I can see them going receiver as well with Jordan Addison. But I think that, giving your young quarterback a security blanket, a guy that he could trust on 3rd and 8 every play, I think that'd be a good pick here, especially because Mercedes Lewis right now is your starting tight end, which I don't think is a great pick when almost a 39-year-old tight end is your starting tight end. So I think that Michael Mayer is my tight end one right now, and I think he's the highest floor probably, maybe not the highest ceiling, but if you're the Packers right now, you're just trying to give Jordan Love enough weapons to figure out whether or not, that your first-round quarterback can actually be your franchise quarterback.
Yeah, I think even Mercedes Lewis is a free agent. So right now, Josiah DeGuara is their starting tight end.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So they could definitely use help at the position. We'll see if they have some extra picks as they actually make it to the draft if Rodgers is traded beforehand. And to me personally, I will just say that I think the Jets making moves with Elijah Moore right now is kind of a sign that that's on the horizon. I think they're just kind of setting themselves up for the picks they want to have versus what they're willing to give up. And so I would expect that to happen, coming up here fairly soon. But that's just me reading the tea leaves, not necessarily knowing anything. All right. I think we're going to pick up the pace here just a little bit because it's, how we always operate, like spend a good, hour and a half on the first 15 picks and then have to roll through. So I'm going to expedite that slightly. At pick 16, the Washington Commanders select Broderick Jones, tackle from Georgia. So the final of the big three tackles goes off the board here to Washington, who definitely need offensive line help. I mean, I think, Charles Leno is nice that they were able to get him kind of last minute when the Bears released him, and he's been there for a little while, help solidify things, but I think you could do a lot better at the position, and I think Broderick Jones is a great fit for that. Max, what do you see in Jones as a fit for the Commanders?
Yeah, I think this is, they kind of need help at, quarterback. Or actually, I think Sam Howell could. I was a Sam Howell truther. I actually had him as QB1 last year, so I'm very much on the train of seeing where this plays out with Sam Howell. I actually had him like a top 20 guy on my big board. So him going in the 5th round was a little bit shocking, to say the least. But corner, I think, is another area. But like I said, Gonzalez is off the board here, so I don't think there's a corner that you want to take here. And then offensive tackle, I think, is the next big need for them. So I think that Broderick Jones, like we just mentioned before, I think he is a coin flip with Paris Johnson Jr., and he easily is probably a top 20 pick. So I think the Commanders here, I love Samuel Cosmi. I was super high on him coming out in 2021 draft. And he actually has played pretty well, but you still need another tackle. And Leno, it was a good, like you said, a guy that you could just plug a hole, basically, but I don't know if he's a guy that you want to invest in long-term at tackle. So I think that Broderick Jones, who I love his tape at Georgia, I was so impressed by him this past year. I think he's a guy that would basically be a sprint the card in type pick for Washington here.
Yeah, if he makes it to 16, then I think that they'd be happy to. I mean, is there anything else that you'd like to point out about this fit with Jones here in Washington, Kyron?
No, not really. The fit would be perfect. I mean, they need a tackle. He's a young guy, ton of athleticism, can really help in the run game. They have 2 really good running backs in Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, so I think he would help in the run game exponentially as well. The only thing that I would be interested to see is if tackle was the number 1 fit for pick for them, because I can see them going edge here. I can see them going DB, like a Brian Branch would help that secondary ridiculously. So I think edge or DB is also a pick here, but I would be interested to see if tackle is their number 1 priority, because I think he is a great fit if he's there. Even if he's not there, I mean, Paris Johnson Jr. is here at 16, he will be a good fit for them. So best tackle available or best defender available will be interesting to see how they go.
All right. Pick 17, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Joey Porter Jr. We know that they like him. I think Nick was the one who talked about that last week, about how high the Steelers are on Joey Porter Jr. So they need cornerback help. They kind of managed last year. They lost their number 1 corner in free agency this year. So it's time to kind of reinvest in that. I think tackle is the other place where I think they could really use some priority picks on, or some premium picks on. But with the big 3 off the board just before this, I think Joey Porter makes a lot of sense for them. Max, you said you are a Steelers fan after all, even though you're more into college football, still a Pittsburgh guy. So how do you like Porter fitting into this Pittsburgh Steelers defense that already has Fitzpatrick in the back end?
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned before, like, I think O-line would be a dream for them. And I think Broderick Jones kind of going the pick before, breaks their heart a little bit. But they need help at corner. And you mentioned Cameron Sutton is gone now. He's with the Detroit Lions. They brought in Patrick Peterson, who was really good actually last year for Minnesota and showed that he still has some gas left in the tank at 33 years old. But other than that, like Levi Wallace and Arthur Mollett are like your 2 other starting corners right now. So like that, you just can't have that. And not only that, Joey Porter Jr., I think, is probably the next best corner in this class. Press man corner would fit in Pittsburgh. Not only that, Pittsburgh is like, this is a perfect – Pittsburgh has a very family-type feel in that franchise. Joey Porter's dad, Joey Porter Sr., was like an all-pro edge defender for the Steelers back when I was a kid. So I think that they would love this, being able to take a son of a Steelers legend with their first round pick, I think they would fall head over heels for that. I know Mike Tomlin would love doing that as well. So I think that this is a pick that not only is he a scheme fit, not only is he worth the pick, not only is he a need for the Steelers, he also is a son of a Steelers legend. So I think that's a pick that, they would love to make, and they would love the storylines that would come from this pick. So this is a pick I think the Steelers could very well make in the NFL draft. And I think in this scenario, I think he's the correct pick as well.
Legacy pick. Kyron, what do you think?
Legacy pick, exactly.
I have nothing to add. I 100% agree.
All right. Cool. Okay, so at pick 18, now this is a player that I am higher on, I think, than Kyron. And so I love this fit. And I can't remember if I also mocked him here at 18 last week, but Kalijah Kancey, the defensive interior from Pittsburgh, going to the Lions at 18. I like it. Max, what made you select Kancey here as the fit?
Oh, I love Kalijah Kancey. I think we're talking about him a little bit later, but I think he is close with the next D tackle, Brian Bresee, who I also really like. But Kancey, man, I understand the size concerns. He's very small, but he's a freak athlete, which you kind of need to be, and if you're that small at D tackle. And he's dominated. I mean, he's just been like the best pass rusher in college football, the D tackle position, for like the last couple of years now. And I've loved his tape. I think he's a freak. And I think if you have the Lions, who took Witherspoon at 6, obviously if Jalen Carter was the pick at 6, then maybe you say, okay, maybe you take a Deontay Banks or something like that here at the 18th pick. But otherwise, now that you kind of still need to invest in the D-line, I think Kancey or Bresee would be a great pick here for the Lions. So I would lean Kancey only because I like his tape a little bit more, but I understand the tools of Bresee are special. I like Kancey here, though. I think his tape is awesome, and I think his tools are really good, even besides his size. So I think he's a guy that could really produce in the NFL as a pass rusher and could even go higher than this in the actual NFL draft. And I don't know. I think this would be a really cool fit. I know Dan Campbell probably would really like his tape as well.
Kyron, I know that you're kind of in on Bresee here. I like Kancey better. I mean, I just think he's more pro-ready. I think that you can look at the tools of Bresee as well, but it's just a lot more projection for me. But how do you feel about this pairing at the very least?
I mean, it makes sense pairing-wise. I just the player himself, and it's not like the size doesn't really concern me. It's the strength. I don't think he plays with enough play strength to just come in and do what he did in college in the NFL. It's just a different caliber of athlete, a different caliber of man that you're going against in the NFL. But I do think that the fit would be good because the Detroit Lions they move a lot on the front. They run a lot of stunts. They have a lot of interchangeable parts there, especially with the guys that they have on the edge. They do a lot with that, which could probably free him up to give him a little bit more one-on-ones. But I see a lot of people making like the lazy Aaron Donald comp, and I just think that's so irresponsible just because they're undersized guys that come from Pittsburgh. And I think a lot of people have kind of like made it in their head to where like he could be the next guy of that mold. And I just think that's irresponsible for him because I like the guy, I like the player. It's just I don't know if I like him at 18. You know what I mean? Maybe a late first, early second in that round. Then you definitely take a chance on a guy like this because of his raw athletic ability and what he's put on tape the last couple of years. But I just don't want people to fall into that trap of projecting him to be the next Aaron Donald because of the obvious similarities where they went to school, kind of how they are stature-wise. But I like the guy. I just don't know if I like him this high. And I want people to like taper the expectation a little bit because I think he can be a very good player in the NFL. But I just see so many Aaron Donald comps. Aaron Donald comps, like, relax. That's not fair to that kid because he could be a good player and not be Aaron Donald and be still considered as a failure. Yeah. Kind of like akin to what Jordan Davis was. I wasn't super high on Jordan Davis last year, but everybody saw him run 4.7, something crazy like that. And they're like, he's going to be the next greatest thing ever. And then he struggled a lot his rookie year. And I think that a lot of people kind of saw his rookie year as a failure because of that. And I don't think he was a failure. I think he was a young NFL talent figuring it out. And if you were more realistic with the expectation going in, then you wouldn't be as disappointed. So I like the guy. I do think he's going to be a very productive NFL player. I just would like for people to be a little bit more, have a little bit more pause when they make those comparisons because it's not his fault. He did his job. He can't control his natural size. He is his size. He can't control anything else besides the tape he put out, which was really good tape. He tested really well. He checked off all the boxes. So if you believe in him that much and you take him there, I have no complaints with that. I just hope people are a little bit more responsible.
He's not the greatest defensive player of all time. I think that's pretty fair. I think that comparison is a little ridiculous, I think, too. I agree.
Right.
Yeah, look, I mean, the battle against getting NFL fans to have more realistic expectations, I mean, I appreciate it. But it's, um, there's a question of whether the effort is worthwhile. All right. At 19, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers draft Dalton Kincaid, the tight end out of
Ooh.
So,
I know, this is a hot one. This is where I kind of went off the rails a little bit.
Listen, I wish he was there last year because they needed a tight end desperately in the passing game.
Yeah, I feel like Kyron kind of has like a secret love for the Bucks for some reason. I don't know if it's because you're a big Brady fan or what, but like there's definitely something there. So
my uncle played in Tampa growing up, so I got to watch the Bucks Super Bowl run in 2003. My uncle won the Arena Football League championship that year, and I grew up around there. Then I played for the Tampa Bay Storm in the Arena League, so I have a really fond attachment to Tampa. It's one of my favorite places.
Tampa's awesome. Tampa's pretty awesome. My girlfriend's dad and mom live there, so it's pretty awesome.
Okay, Ybor City, one of the best nights you'll ever have.
Yeah.
All right, nice. I got to get back to Florida one of these days, man. Okay, so look, let's talk about Dalton Kincaid going to the Bucks. All right, so I don't think this is a commonly mocked pick here. I think it's just because they have a fair amount of needs. You know what I mean? They need offensive linemen. Yeah. They definitely need a quarterback. And so people have had different opinions on who might go. I think Daniel Jeremiah recently had, if I remember right, I think that he had Will Levis falling here and going there. So like they're definitely in the market for a quarterback, and whether that's realistic or not, I don't think anybody's talking tight end. So what sold you on this fit?
Yeah, this is kind of like this is more of like a value pick here. I think, like you mentioned, they have so many needs. Anton Harrison, I thought could have been a good pick here too. We'll talk about him later. But I like Kincaid. I think it's a good value for him. I think Kincaid's a really good prospect, and they need tight end, like you mentioned before. Like O'Keefe is one of the tight ends, Kate Otten and Cameron Brate, and they got Kyle Rudolph too. But like it's not good. And they need they need a tight end. I don't know if I would, they're actually going to take one in the first round. I doubt it, honestly. But Kincaid is a guy who's a terrific receiving tight end, really good after the catch. I think, like I said before, I think there's a argument, and that I didn't have at least Darnell Washington going first round. But I think he's just up there with them as well, with Mayer and Dalton Kincaid. So I would. This is a fun pick. This is where I kind of try to have a little fun with this mock draft and put him here because I know this is a pick that not a lot of Buccaneers fans have been seeing. But I think this could be a really fun pick and help out Baker Mayfield in that offense, or whoever, or Kyle Trask or whoever in that offense, and. Or potentially if they really stink next year, you give another weapon to Caleb Williams or Drake May in that offense. So, and then that would be really good for you as well. So offensive line, definitely a priority. I just, with the big three gone, I think there's a pretty clear gap between the big three and the next offensive lineman. But I do think tight end could be a fun pick here for Tampa Bay.
So it's interesting that you don't have Darnell Washington going in the first round, because we've seen him go all over the place in mocks, right? I might be the highest on him out of anybody I know. I think personally, I see him as, like, let's talk positional value aside, I think he's one of the 5 best prospects, regardless of position, in the whole draft. Do I think he's going to go top 5? No, obviously I don't. Would I take him top 5? No, but I would take him a lot higher than most people. I think what he brings to the table is dominant in one facet of the game. So especially if you're a run-heavy offense. And then I just think it's just so much untapped potential. And I don't even think it's like, because it's just, I don't think it's just like it's undeveloped. I just think he just wasn't used that much in that way. I think the development is a lot further along in the passing game too. So I think he's pretty incredible. And I'm only going to kind of talk about him right now just because we're not going to have an opportunity to anywhere else in the first round. But I love him. So, if I am going tight end early, that's probably where I would lean. But in terms of the Buccaneers here, getting a pass catcher, a playmaker, probably of any kind would be helpful for them. I mean, they're kind of set outside, although who knows how long, Mike Evans is going to be there. So that's a question, but interesting to say the least. And I think that, any way that you can get a starter onto the field on offense for them right now, that's probably a great direction to go. So even though he's not the one that I would have necessarily taken, I do think that getting a starting level tight end or offensive weapon is a big deal for them. Anything else that you guys want to say on Darnell Washington while we kind of have our our Darnell moment here?
No, I mean, I love Darnell. I think Darnell is probably my tight end two. My tight end one is actually Dalton Kincaid. I really love Dalton Kincaid. I just think that the Mayer fit at 15 makes all the sense in the world. It's the perfect fit, especially for a LaFleur offense and how much he's integrated tight ends into the passing schemes and everything. And I also think that Dalton Kincaid here would be a really good value pick. I would probably go offensive line here. I think that this is the time that they should bolster the interior of the offensive line. I would look at Osiris Torres makes a lot of sense here. Keeping the Florida guy in Florida, just his ability to move people in the run game. They aren't going to be a heavy drop back team, presumably with either Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. It'll be a lot of quick hitting stuff. So some of the concerns, I don't have many concerns with him pass blocking, but some of the concerns people have with him in 5-step pass blocking won't be as glaring here because they're going to be getting the ball out very, very quick in Tampa Bay, and they're going to be running the football a lot. So I think he would make a lot of sense, especially if you're going to suck and you're going to be tooling up for Caleb Williams here. You can get worse. You can get some of the younger guys to come along, and then you can have Osiris Torrance on the interior there. I think it'd be a great pick for the Bucs here. But I'm not going to lie, I do love Dalton Kincaid enough to where I'm be like, hey, I'm rolling with it. Let's do this too, because I think he can be a very interesting vertical threat, especially in that division. They don't have a lot of versatile safety play or versatile linebacker play where they could, account for a guy like that in the passing game. I think he could really succeed there.
All right. Pick number 20. This is the exact same combination that we had the Seattle Seahawks getting last week, which I think is funny, and it's a beautiful combination. Jalen Carter goes at 5, and then at 20 they get Nolan Smith, the edge defender from Georgia. We talked about Smith a little bit earlier. Smaller edge defender, super explosive, former number 1 overall recruit, I believe. So just athletic traits, just like crazy. But he's not super tall, not super long, super high effort, high motor player. So, I mean, there's a lot to fall in love with. But I think, you just look at the size and you're like, okay, well, it's probably not a guy that we can count on for both phases consistently. So he falls down to 20 because so much else he has going for him. So why do you have the Seahawks taking Smith here at 20?
I think they just need help with the defensive line in all aspects. And I think I love the connection of taking 2 Georgia defensive linemen. And history has proven to be pretty smart to take Georgia defensive linemen. So I think that, a guy like Jalen Carter, who's a blue chip guy, Nolan Smith, who was a blue chip recruit, like you mentioned, coming out, he's a number 1 overall recruit. We'll get to another former number 1 overall recruit on the defensive line pretty soon. But yeah, Nolan Smith is a guy who's super athletic, great run defender. He has tools as a pass rusher. He's still coming along in that aspect, but I think he can get there. And I think that the Seahawks have proven that they kind of value tools on the defensive line. Boye Mafe is a guy who they took on day 2 last year. Love Boye Mafe coming out of Minnesota. And he played all right in his rookie year, and I think he could potentially be a starter for them down the line. I think Nolan Smith could be right along with them. So you could have 2 freak athletes at edge defender there in Seattle with Uchenna and Nwosu as well there too. So I think that this is a good fit for them. I think they need help on the defensive line, both on the interior and at edge. So if you can come away from the first round with a top flight interior defensive lineman, Jalen Carter, and a guy in Nolan Smith who I think is worth a top 20 pick in the draft, I think that'd be a pretty slam dunk first round for the Seahawks.
Yep, agreed. I know you like this matchup, Kyron. I think this gives you pass rush on the interior, pass rush outside. I think, you kind of already got your run stuffing set up, so you don't need to necessarily worry about that. If you have him playing that sort of outside linebacker role, then he's just not going to have to take on tackles and run fits nearly as much. It's going to be a good fit for him, I think. All right. At pick 21, this is one of my favorite fits too. I don't think we mocked him because I didn't have control of this pick last week, but Jordan Addison, wide receiver from USC, going to the Chargers. I know they've got guys already, but Addison as a deep threat is such a great combination with Justin Herbert's arm. I think he's the missing piece, and he's one of the most pro-ready receivers in this year's draft. So I love it. Why do you see Jordan Addison going to the Chargers?
I like you just mentioned, I think he's a guy that is their missing piece in the offense, honestly. And Keenan Allen, who I think is still a good receiver, but he's getting up there in age. They got Mike Williams on the outside, too, who's kind of like their big-bodied receiver. That's why I think Jordan Addison will fit so well in this offense, just because, he's not the fastest in the world. I think he ran somewhere in the 4.5s at the combine or high 4.4s. And he's not the biggest in the world either, but he is just a phenomenal route runner. He gets open at will. He showed at Pitt that he had really good body control too. He can make ridiculous catches. I think this is a guy that you just need to help Justin Herbert out. I mean, it's at the point now where like you need to give him something at wide receiver. And they have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, like I mentioned before, but they need another guy there because if you want to compete in the AFC and you want to, and a lot of Chargers fans are arguing that, hey, this guy's better than Joe Burrow. Well, you got to let him prove that. And I don't think he is, but you got to let him at least prove that. And Joe Burrow has all those weapons in Cincinnati for now, at least. But Los Angeles has got to do that too and give him weapons. So I think Jordan Addison is a top receiver, I think clearly on the board right here. So I think this is a great pick for Los Angeles. I also really like the fit, like you mentioned before, Max, in Los Angeles too for him. So yeah, I think this would be, again, another like sprint the card type pick for them.
Right on. All right. Kyron, I know you like Jordan Addison too. We already kind of talked about him being baby Diggs, but
yeah.
All right. At pick 22, Zay Flowers goes to the Baltimore Ravens. A lot of people have talked about them needing receiver help, and I think they definitely do need receiver help. How do you guys see him fitting in there? Because we haven't done our Zay Flowers breakdown yet, but I did talk with Nick a little bit about him. I kind of have some opinions on how I see him as a player. But what stands out to you, Max, and why do you see the Ravens as the right fit?
Yeah, he's a very quick receiver. Like he in a phone booth, you're not going to tackle this guy. Like he's like that type of receiver where the bounce he has is ridiculous. He avoids contact really well. He has pretty good top end speed. Now he's not the biggest receiver, of course. Like I mentioned before, Jordan Addison, he's only 5'9", 182, so he's a smaller receiver. But I still think he's a guy. Now, of course, this is a pick that I made with the idea of Lamar Jackson will be the Ravens quarterback. That might not happen anymore. Now all of a sudden he's publicly said he demanded a trade. All of a sudden now we didn't talk about it before. They could be picking number 4 overall in this draft. They could be taking an Anthony Richardson in Baltimore, who I think would fit in that offense as a run threat as well. I mean, not as good of a runner, of course, as Lamar Jackson is, but all of a sudden you could be talking about the Ravens being the 4th overall pick, or the Lions at the 6th overall pick, and maybe getting their quarterback there. So maybe this is a spot where you want to give your rookie quarterback, like you did with the Texans, give your rookie quarterback a also first-round receiver. And I think this is a spot where not only would I make this pick for Lamar Jackson, I make this pick for Anthony Richardson. I make this pick for potentially Will Levis, or even like we'll see what happens with other teams as well. So this could be a scenario where the Ravens have a brand new quarterback in Richardson or Levis, and they need, of course, they still need help at receiver. So I think Zay Flowers, especially if it's Levis, they need to have some receivers. And I think Zay Flowers, they just need to force receiver here at 22. Probably a little bit higher than I take Zay Flowers, but like I said, you got to force receiver at 22 if you're taking a guy like Will Levis because he needs some weapons to throw to.
Kyron, what do you think about Zay Flowers and the fit at Baltimore?
I mean, I love Zay Flowers a lot, and especially with Todd Monken coming in. He's going to want to stretch the field a little bit, and they have plenty of tight ends, so that's not going to be an issue. So he's going to use the tight ends a lot, and he's going to need somebody to stretch the field. And I think they have that with Rashad Bateman, but he hasn't been able to stay on the field. So if you can match him and Rashad Bateman together, I think it's a really good fit. And I also wouldn't be shocked here. I've seen a couple rumblings, just getting some text here about the Patriots inquiring about Lamar Jackson. So if it's a situation to where Mac Jones is there, I think Mac Jones and Tom Monken is a great fit for one. And I think that Mac Jones getting some more weapons to stretch the field vertically because he's a very good deep ball passer, and he's going to be able to use the tight ends and then, have some of those high-low vertical threats. I think it'll be a very good fit. And I wouldn't be shocked if we end up seeing that happen. I know it's not necessarily the Patriot way, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. And if you're talking about the Ravens getting somebody in return that fits what they want to do, be a little bit more traditional, running the football, be a little bit more conservative in the passing game, especially with Todd Monken coming in, I think that would be a really good fit. So Zay Flowers coming in to help a young quarterback out like Mac Jones or Will Levis or Richardson, like you said, I think it's a good fit regardless of who's there. So Zay Flowers, I'm really high on. I really like him a lot. Some of the size concerns have been, kind of, quelling people a little bit, but he's 180 pounds. I think he can grow and get a little bit bigger. But what he does have is that game-breaking speed and that yak ability that not a lot of guys in this receiver draft have. So I think he's a really good fit for whoever's going to be the quarterback here.
Yeah, I think he needs still some development in the route running. This is a guy that you're definitely going to want to scheme touches up for early on. And I love his tenacity. I love the way he plays, like the way he approaches the game and attacks like every play. He loves to engage and blocks. Like if the DB is there to be engaged with, he is just more than happy to do that. I think the route running, it definitely needs some work though. So you got to have a plan for him, I feel. But I think you can trust that he will develop over time. Just got to know what you're getting yourself into year one. Definitely explosive. I wish that they had done more in terms of scheming up touches for him in Boston College, because I think that, you know, they had him just run straight up routes probably too much. And he just could have done more for them, I think. But that's a conversation for another day. All right, who do we have next? We have Defiant Banks from Maryland going to the Minnesota Vikings. Definitely need corner help. The 3 top guys are off the board. So how do you see Banks fitting in with the Vikings?
Yeah, they need corner help. I mentioned before how Patrick Peterson is now a Steeler, which I think was a great signing for the Steelers, but obviously that takes away from the Vikings. They got Byron Murphy in free agency. They have Chandon Sullivan as one of their other corners. And I think a lot of people forget, I wasn't as high on him coming out, but a lot of people forget that Andrew Booth is there too. They took him in the 2nd round last year as well, and he could be a long-term play for them. But they still need corner, though, even if Andrew Booth turns out to be a really good corner. And I think Defiant Banks is the next best corner, I would say, in this class. He had an impressive year this past year. He is uber athletic. He might be a bigger freak athlete, or at least on par with Christian Gonzalez. Like, he is 6 feet tall, 197 pounds, ran a 4.35 in the 40, 42-inch vertical, 11-foot 4-inch broad jump. Like, that is freakish tools at the position. So I think he's really good in terms of mirroring receivers. I don't think he's as good in press coverage, but I think he's a versatile corner. Maybe even could be a bigger slot corner in the NFL. But I think that Defiant Banks is a guy that Minnesota should be looking at very heavily in this draft, because, like I mentioned before, they need a corner. They also could use a receiver now, losing Adam Thielen. But I didn't know if I want to do it here with Defiant Banks on the board. So I think they need corner almost just as badly as well. So they need a corner, and I think Defiant Banks is the next best one, and I think he would fit pretty well in that Minnesota defense.
Yep, I think, they did invest in the defensive secondary last draft, but I don't think it would be a mistake to come back to that and really solidify it, because it was one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year. And regardless of whatever statistical production they were able to put out there from week to week, they were one of the biggest reasons that the team was not able to go farther in the playoffs and potentially even clinch that number 1 seed. So I like it. Kyron, do you have anything to add on to Defiant Banks here?
No, I like Defiant Banks. I just think I like Emmanuel Forbes a little bit more. I think Defiant Banks may be more of a scheme fit a little bit, but I think the high-end ability of Emmanuel Forbes and his ability to just find the ball, he's always around the ball. I think he led the NCAA in interceptions the last 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Might be misquoting there, but he was up there. He's amongst the top, and I think his just ball hawking ability to take the ball away from the offense is probably a little bit better than Defiant Banks. But, man, like you said, his freak athletic ability, like we said about these coaches that can want to mold people, he's a guy that you can mold into pretty much anything that you want. So I think Emmanuel Forbes might be a little bit more ready to play. I 100% understand why everybody's falling in love with Defiant Banks, especially when you go back and watch some of that Maryland film, how good him and Jacorian Bennett were together in that back end. So it's been interesting to see how fast he's climbed, but I really do like him, and I think the pick makes all the sense in the world.
All right, let's get back to another offensive line selection, guy that, Kyron, you've been waiting to see go off the board. The Jacksonville Jaguars select Osiris Torrance, guard from Florida, at 24th overall. So we know that they lost Jawan Taylor in free agency. They have Walker Little waiting in the wings as a potential replacement at tackle, but this solidifies their interior guy to go along with Brandon Sheriff there. So how do you feel about this pairing? And I'll come to you first, Kyron, on this one. How do you feel about this pairing? And do you feel like this is a reasonable place for him to go? Do you think he should go higher? What do you think?
Well, I think anything after 19 with the Bucs is perfectly fine for Osiris Torrance. I think he's the best interior offensive lineman in this draft. I think this would be a great fit. The only thing that I would kind of push back on a little bit is I think that Darnell Washington might be an even better fit here in Jacksonville. If you could get Darnell with Trevor Lawrence and give him a guy underneath that they can kind of, especially him and Dougie P, can kind of open it up a little bit more. And that aspect, that might be a little bit more of a value pick here. But I mean, you did lose Jawan Taylor. You're presumably going to lose Cam Robinson in the future. You probably need to go ahead and start retooling the offensive line now. So I have no qualms with this pick at all. Listen, I really love Osiris. I think he's going to move people and help in that run game, especially with Etienne. They do a little bit more zone stuff than most teams do. So I think that might be a little bit of a concern, but I don't have those concerns about Osiris. I think he's going to be fine. He's so big. It's going to be hard to get around a guy like that. And he's not like a slew foot guy. He's very fleet of foot. He can move. He's going to be able to get up on second levels too. So I love the pick here. I just don't know if I like it more than Darnell Washington. I'm kind of battling back and forth with it here, but one of those two guys, absolutely love it. Either one, you can't go wrong in my opinion.
Yeah, I was very close to actually putting Darnell Washington here. I think the reason why I strayed away from that is because they franchise tagged Evan Ingram, so obviously it's a one-year thing. But I think he's a guy that, actually had a really good year. Maybe potentially he's a long-term tight end for them. But I would also love the Darnell Washington pick for Jacksonville as well. Torrance, I think you just want to protect Lawrence as much as you can. You gave big money to Brandon Scherf last year. He actually didn't perform as well as he usually does. And then Tyler Shatley is really your other guard right now. So like he's never really been that good of a guard. So Torrance, best guard in the country this past year, one of the best offensive linemen, period, this past year. So I think he is a first round caliber guard. And you have, a need on the offensive line. I do agree that they don't. I was thinking of Anton Harrison too, but like I want to see what Walker Little has at least at tackle before taking another tackle. So I would rather, shore up the interior a little bit with, a first-round caliber interior offensive lineman, which you don't really see all that much in Osiris Torrance. So I think, for him to take over from Tyler Shatley, all of a sudden you got Brandon Scherf at one guard spot and Osiris Torrance at the other guard spot. Like that's a pretty good guard duo there for Jacksonville and protecting Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, creating lanes for what's his name?
Etienne.
Their run Etienne.
Yeah.
Do they have a second? The Jags.
Second round pick.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, they got a second round pick.
So if they have a second, I love the pick because they can get a very good tackle prospect in the second round. I mean, you look at the Bergerons, you look at the Harrisons, you look at the potentially like a Tyler Steen, or even a guy that I really, really high on, Darnell Wright. I don't think he'll fall out of the first round, but 4 of those guys right there in the second round will be there for a team like Jacksonville that they could get both, I think, in this draft.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So at the next pick, 25, you have a player going a little bit earlier than I've seen from most people. And I think, pound for pound, Josh Downs might be the second best receiver in the draft. And then it's just a question of, how high do you want to take a slot receiver? But Josh Downs from North Carolina goes to the New York Giants at 25. Tell me why you love this fit.
Yeah, I just love Josh Downs. I think he's a really good receiver. I think he's a guy that, probably deserves to be a first-round pick. Maybe the fit in New York isn't the best after investing in Wan'Dale Robinson, but I wasn't really a fan of that pick. They obviously have kind of a smaller receiving core as well. So, but I think, with him, you got a guy like Isaiah Hodgins who really came on last year. He's a bigger receiver at 6'4". You have size at receiver at Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell just brought in as well. So I think that Josh Downs can be your starting slot receiver and not Wan'Dale Robinson. And he's a guy that I think should be a first-round caliber player. And the Giants still need help at receiver. And I think he's clearly, in my opinion at least, the next best receiver on the board. So that's why I would lead him over another player here.
Kyron, how do you feel about Josh Downs?
Listen, I love Josh Downs. The only reason I don't think that they go that is because of what you said. They have Wan'Dale, and they re-signed Sterling Shepard, even though it's a cheap deal and you don't know if he'll be around a lot longer. They do have like 3 slots right now, but I love Josh Downs. I think he's so underrated, and I do think he has some outside ability. I think you can put him outside a little more just because of his natural speed and his route running ability. And like you said, pound for pound, I mean, I think he's probably the second best route runner in the draft, or maybe third. It's a toss-up between him and Addison with the route running. I think Jackson Smith-Njigba was the best overall for sure, but he's a dynamic route runner, and he catches the ball, man. He doesn't drop the ball. He's always getting open. So it's one thing to have the ability. There's a lot of guys that have ability, like Quentin Johnson, but it's another thing to have the refinement and the ability and just the acumen to get open. He always finds the space, and he always makes the tough catches. The only thing that I would say that he has been playing with Drake May the last couple of years, and he's maybe gotten a little bit spoiled with the ball placement and stuff. He hasn't really had to make some of the crazy contested catches that he might have to make on the next level. So I don't know if that will be a concern, but if you're talking about ability and fit, I think he'll be a really good fit here in New York because he is super underrated.
Yeah, and it's real quick. I mean, this has nothing to do with Josh, but I mean, the Downs family, we could be talking in a few years when we do a 2026 mock draft. the Caleb Downs, who was the Josh's little brother.
Listen.
Dude, I was watching him yesterday. Oh my God, Kyron.
I can't wait, bro.
He's a safe, for anyone who doesn't know, he's a number 5 recruit coming out. He's a 5-star safety going to Alabama. I mean, they're talking about this kid. His comparison literally is Eric Berry right now.
Yeah,
they're talking about him as Micah Fitzpatrick, maybe in the next. He's a superstar. So part of the Downs family. He's Josh's little brother. I was watching him last night, and man, this guy is special. So watch out for him this upcoming season. He could be a superstar safety for Alabama.
All right, nice. So yeah, look, I think Josh Downs is honestly kind of a fit anywhere where somebody can get him the ball effectively. I think he's a really good player, and where he'll go, I couldn't tell you. I mean, certainly top half of the second round has got to be the floor. Like, I don't think he'll fall lower than that, but how high is another question. All right, 26, Brian Bresee, defensive interior from Clemson, goes to the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm not the biggest fan of Bresee. I know that the traits are kind of crazy, but I don't really see a plan with him when he start like snap to snap. I don't feel like he like has a defined way in which he attacks every single play. And so I just feel like it's going to be a pretty big step for him to move to the NFL. I don't see him as, he might absorb snaps, but I just don't see him as making an impact in year one. So outside of a few just athletic splash plays. So I'm hesitant on where I would invest, but why do you like Bresee going to the Cowboys?
Yeah, I think he's potentially a top 20 player for me in this draft. And I think he was the number 1 overall recruit coming out in 2020 class. Like Nolan Smith is the number 1 overall recruit coming out in 2019. And the reason why he's the number 1 overall recruit is because of that freakish tools that this guy possesses. I mean, he's 6'5". He's had a superb combine. And I thought he actually played well. I thought his freshman year, I think he had was 4th in the Power 5 in pressures at D tackle his freshman year. Sophomore year, tears his ACL in the 4th game of the season. Junior year, battles his shoulder injury. Unfortunately, had some stuff going on personally too. His sister unfortunately died from cancer, which is horrible. And somehow he still was able to play through that. And his character has been unbelievable. And he seems like the best guy in the world. And he also, I think the tools there are all special for Brian Bresee. And I think he's a guy that, Dallas needs help on the defensive line, at least in the interior. And for a long time, they needed help on there. And I think Brian Bresee, yes, the refinement isn't there, but there are some serious, like you mentioned for Levis, there are some serious excuses for Brian Bresee as to why he hasn't been able to get refined. And also, I think the scheme in Clemson really did him no favors as well either. I don't think he really was a scheme fit in that Clemson defense. So I think he's a guy that is a super athlete. He actually has played well, in my opinion. He's got to improve as a run defender. But it's kind of scary that he was as effective of a pass rusher as he was at Clemson, and he didn't really have any pass rushing moves. So if you think about that and say, wow, when this guy gets some pass rushing moves, he can be a monster because he already was a very good pass rusher without being a refined pass rusher. So that's very, the NFL draft's all about what you can be, not what you are right now. I think what Brian Bresee can be is a superstar defensive tackle, but he obviously has a lot of work to do to get there. And I think getting him here at 26 would be pretty good for the Cowboys, who interior defensive line is one of their biggest needs right now.
Definitely a need for the Cowboys. Kyron, I know you like Bresee a bit more than me. How do you like this fit?
Well, I love the fit. This is a spot that was really interesting to me because coming out of the season, I thought Siaka Ika would be a great fit for them, kind of be like in the Vita Vea role, just stuffing the interior and letting those guys on the edge really just do whatever they want to. I thought he would be a good fit here, but I love Brian Bresee here. I think it's a really good fit. They've needed interior help for a very long time, as you said. And they need somebody that has some of those freakish tools because you're going to get a lot of one-on-ones, especially with these guys on the edges. They have to help on those guys, especially if they're going to bump into Marcus Lawrence and have him playing a 3-tech as well. Sometimes, you have to account for those guys. So he's going to get a lot of one-on-ones, and he has that ability. When he's been on the field, I've liked everything I've seen from Brian Bresee. He has a motor, even when he's not always making the tackle or making the play that gets recorded stat-wise. Like you say, he has a lot of pressures, but he's very disruptive in the run game. He penetrates, even when he's not getting the tackles or the stat. He's the one that's disrupting the play and making the plays for those linebackers. And you can talk. I know I talked to Todd Bates, who was there for 2020 and 2021. He was my coach in junior college and at Jacksonville State University, and he loves him. You talk about a guy off the field he raves about. He said Brian Bresee is one of the best people that has ever been around. So you don't have some of those off the field concerns that you have to worry about. And talking about a guy that works, he said that works tirelessly. So some of the stuff that you're talking about molding wise, I don't think he's going to have any problem adjusting, especially if he's going to be able to get those one-on-ones in that defense. So I love the pick. I think we had Jahmyr Gibbs being mocked here, but I wouldn't be mad if they go tight end. I can see them going tight end as well here if they have a guy that they really love. But tight end, interior defensive line, running back, either one of those would be great picks here. But I love Brian Brzee. I think he's going to be fine next level.
All right, let's run through a couple of these last guys together just because we are running a little bit long here. So at the Bills taking their making the number 27 pick, they take Bijan Robinson, running back from Texas, who is, like, let's be honest, we all know what Bijan is. He's a complete back. He does everything. He's awesome. I think if the Bills get him at 27, they'll be very happy with that. And then at pick number 28, you have Anton Harrison, the tackle from Oklahoma, going to the Cincinnati Bengals. Although they did just spend a fair amount of money for Orlando Brown, I definitely think that another tackle is a viable choice there, especially because I'm not sure how long Lyle Collins will be with them. Yeah. So if you want to kind of combine those two real quick, then we can make our way out of here.
I mean, yeah, Bijan Robinson, we don't need to talk about him too much. Like, he's a generational running back prospect, the best we've seen since Saquon Barkley. There's an argument to be made farther than that. I probably wouldn't make that argument, but like, he is a special tackle breaker, and he could be a missing piece. And just imagining like the read option with him and Josh Allen is hilarious to think about with the receivers they got there as well. Like, he could be that missing piece in the offense, honestly. And they've come up short in Super Bowl runs before. I mean, you give Josh Allen the best running back prospect in at least 5 years, and a dominant one at that. And he's a great receiver as well. So not only he's only just a runner. So yeah, I think that'd be a slam dunk pick for Buffalo. I think that's where I'd take Bijan to. I don't know if I'd go a lot higher than that because he's a running back. But Anton Harrison going to the Bengals. He's my next tackle on the board. I really like him in pass protection. Got to improve as a run blocker. Mentioned before, obviously got Orlando Brown Jr. coming in, which was a home run signing for the Bengals. I can't believe they got him for that cheap. But also, Lyle Collins, he's battled injuries. I don't know how long they're going to keep him. There's rumors that they might cut him as well. So, and obviously Jonah Williams is on the trade block, and I think he will be traded pretty soon. So they need another tackle to protect Joe Burrow. I think Anton Harrison, pass protection-wise, would be good. I am worried about him, and Kyron can maybe ease my mind a little bit. I'm worried about him transitioning to right tackle because I know Orlando Brown Jr. will refuse to play right tackle. That's kind of why he wanted to get out of KC to begin with. But I'm wondering about whether or not that might be the best fit. Maybe I should have gone with a guy like Darnell Wright or DeJuan Jones. But I'm wondering what Kyron would think about Anton potentially moving to right tackle in the future.
Well, I think he's another one of the guys, like I talked about earlier with Paris Johnson Jr., that has the athletic ability to go to either side. The only concern I have with him is, like you said, is in the run game. I think that's where he's going to really struggle on the next level. And it's crazy because the Bengals might be the perfect spot for him because of how they balance the run game and the pass game, especially with Joe Burrow. So I have Darnell Wright and Matthew Bergeron ahead of him. I think he's probably my tackle 6 or 7. But I really do like his pass blocking ability. I think he's going to be a very good pass blocker on the next level. And just talking about Lyle Collins, we get out of here. I'm tired of people putting him at tackle. He's a guard. Put him at guard. Let him do what he needs to do in the run game, and that's that. But I do like the Anton Harrison pick here. I think that's the best fit for Anton Harrison. I think he can be at right tackle for them.
Okay. Nice.
All right. So last 3 we can run through as well. New Orleans Saints take Myles Murphy, edge from Clemson. I feel like we did this too because I think the fit is good. Big edge player, guy that they need to develop a little bit. Kind of fits the mold for them. Then you got Lucas Van Ness, the edge defender, kind of versatile guy from Iowa, going to the Philadelphia Eagles. I love Lucas Van Ness personally. And then DaJuan Jones, tackle from Ohio State, going to the Kansas City Chiefs at 31. So, I mean, I think all 3 of these make sense. Lucas Van Ness is my favorite out of those guys. He's definitely a guy that I would be willing to take probably a fair amount higher in the first round, but certainly I'm sure Eagles fans would be happy to get him at 30. Of those last 3 guys, who do you want to touch on and where do you see the fits being ideal?
Yeah, Van Ness is going a lot higher than 30. This is what I would do. I'm a little bit lower on Van Ness than some people, but like this, he's going a lot higher than 30. So this is not a predictive model at all, like I mentioned before. Myles Murphy, freak athlete at edge defender, just like Brian Brzee, his teammate. And he is a guy that is a dominant run defender, was almost the best run defender in the country as a true freshman, kind of tapered off down the stretch. But as he tapered off in run defense, he improved his pass rusher. And I think the tools are there and the Saints love toolsy edge defenders. I know they just lost Marcus Davenport, who's like a toolsy edge defender. I think Myles Murphy could be a good replacement. And then DeJuan Jones, I think you lose Orlando Brown Jr., you need an offensive lineman. DeJuan Jones, I really like. I think he might be the best right tackle, at least in this draft, at least where he played in college. And I think that he was so amazing at Ohio State this past year, one of the lowest pressure rates allowed. And he's the first guy off the bus. Like, he's 6'8", I believe, 374. He broke the record for wingspan at the Senior Bowl. Like, this guy is literally embodies the first guy off the bus to a T. And his movement skills, of course, at that size aren't going to be great, but they're actually better than you would think for a 6'8", 370-pounder. So I think he would fit. And I think it's perfect value for him, and I think he fits a pretty big need in Kansas City as well.
So, Kyron, what do you think about these final 3 trench selections in the first round?
I do agree wholeheartedly about Van Ness. I'm a lot lower on him than a lot of people, but he is going to go a lot higher. So if they're able to get him at 30, 29, that'd be a great fit for them. I 100% agree with Davenport. Comparison kind of with Myles Murphy, I think he'll just fill that Davenport role, and it just makes sense for the Saints. I mean, they've always valued defensive guys, and they don't really need to go offensive line because they did have draft Trevor Penning, and he's coming back from injury. So you're basically adding a first round guy and Trevor Penning and expecting him to fill that role at left tackle for them. And DeJuan Jones, I'm a little bit lower on him than a lot of people are. I don't think he's going to fall much past this or early second round. I just favor Darnell Wright. I like Darnell Wright a lot more. I think he's more athletic. He's a little bit better in the run game, and I think he's going to be fine holding up a pass pro. But he definitely feels a need. If you're talking about a team that could maximize his potential, we've seen what they've done with offensive linemen the last 3 or 4 years and how they molded those guys and kind of tailor the offense to their skill set. So if you're talking about a fit, you can't get a better fit for Kansas City than DeJuan Jones than Kansas City. So I think that would be ideal for him, much like Anton going to the Cincinnati Bengals. So I do love that for DeJuan Jones, especially for the fit.
So, and have we heard this officially, or do we know, are they planning on moving Juwan Taylor over to left tackle for the Chiefs?
Yeah.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I heard. They're 100% doing that.
Okay. All right. Cool. Sounds good, Max. I want to thank you so much. Sorry for taking a little extra of your time there. We are known to run a little bit long here, especially with our mock drafts. But please go check out all of Max's work over at pff.com. He's doing tons of incredible articles. He's been doing interviews with big-time college players as well. I know you had one with Caleb Williams. Really cool. Check him out at Chad_Maxwick on Twitter. And Max, thanks again. Check out Kyron at Kyron Samuels. You can find me at the Max Dean. Check out Noah at Noah Sports. And of course, Defiant Takes Football is on Twitter and all social media at Defiant Takes. Find our written work at defianttakesfootball.com. You can find us live every Monday and Thursday, along with our player breakdowns that are intermittently, sporadically sprinkled in around the week. All right, guys, appreciate you, and we will see you all very soon.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.